All right, good afternoon. My name is Jerome Rogers. I'm the Deputy Commissioner of the ASON Conference, and on behalf of Commissioner Gombart and the ASON Medical Advisory Board, I'd like to welcome you to our first mental wellness education program. This discussion will be held in conjunction with our 2023 Sports Medicine Summer Workshop. I would like to thank Kennesaw State and specifically Mike Young for hosting us this weekend. I'd also like to thank Mike Estes, our Health and Wellness Advisor, and our Mental Wellness Subcommittee made up of subject matter experts from within our own ASON membership, chaired by Dr. Bill Cusbett. This afternoon, we will have 3 presentations from members of the ASON Mental Wellness Subcommittee. Dr. Cusbett will moderate our panel discussions. We're pleased to be streaming this discussion live via YouTube. For our viewing audience, we encourage active participation via the live chat. We will be monitoring the live chat and we'll be fielding questions and taking questions by virtue of how they were received in the order that they were received. We will also be recording this educational session in the same fashion as what we've done in the past and placing the recording on our ASON launch page for the benefit of our membership for a future reference and resource. So without further delay, I'd like to welcome Dr. Bill Cusbett, our moderator. Thank you.
Good afternoon. It's pretty exciting to be here. It's a good deal of stuff about mental health, mental wellness, mental well-being that we talk about, and we're happy that we've been able to be a part of this meeting and share some information. Happy to be able to stream to those who can't be here. It is exciting to put faces to names and see people not in a small screen and meet face to face. So we're pretty excited about that. What we want to get across mostly is that we want you to participate with us. This is sort of a lecture style, the way we're situated, but we want to have discussion. We want to have people ask questions, and we hope that though we may be speaking on topics that you're familiar with, that we share information. One of the things I think that we've seen in working in the subcommittee is that there's a lot of similarities to what we do university by university, but there's also very distinct things that occur, and sharing that information I think is important. And so when we get to some of these topics and try to break through in terms of stigma for mental health, mental well-being, that sharing ideas and sharing things that work is a great way to do that. So we're very excited to be able to do that. We see ourselves, and Jerome mentioned, as a subject area experts, but again, we want to share things that we know and share things we want to talk about, but we want your input. We want a discussion as best that we can. There are, in each of the presentations that we're going to do, opportunities for that. There'll be material that we share to go through the PowerPoint, but we definitely want a discussion. We definitely want questions asked, and we will have time to do that. So please feel free. We have the 3 presentations. Anna is going to start off talking about onboarding. It's not ever too soon to get the student athletes and the staff interacting with them regarding what services and what types of things there are, particularly in this area of mental health, mental well-being. Caroline is going to talk to you about that transition for student athletes becoming collegiate student athletes and what kinds of maybe diagnoses or things that they go through, some ways to identify some of those, and then we'll conclude with a discussion about suicide. So I think we have a good presentation for you. Again, we're only going to be as good and as effective as we get information back from you. And I'd like to do a little introduction of Anna, and then we'll let her proceed with her presentation. Ms. Milwee was hired by the University of North Alabama in 2018. She spent 3 years an academic support specialist before transitioning to compliance and student athlete welfare. She's currently the Assistant Athletics Director for Compliance and Student Success. She creates programs in the area of financial literacy, mental health, professional development, and is also the SAC advisor. She was at UAB and Tulane prior to UNA. Prior to that, spending 3 years as a director of operations for the UAB softball team, assisting with organizing daily activities, team travel, camps, equipment orders for the Blazers. She came to UAB in August of 2014, and as the assistant ticket office. Prior to UAB, Ms. Millie worked in game operations at Tulane. She is a native of Boaz, Alabama, graduated from UNA in 2014 with a degree in sports management. She also received a master's degree in sports management from UNA. And so I'm pleasure to introduce to you Anna Millie.
Thank you, Bill. I'm very excited to be here today, but I just want to thank you all and for what you do. You all often have a thankless job, but you spend the most time with our student athletes. You walk through the mental health crises that they face every day. So I just want to thank you. And so I hope today provides some support to you to better support your student athletes, but also some support for your staff to. A lot of times y'all are the people they come to first, but can we spread the resources out to them to better assist you as well? So today's objectives are, we're going to discuss a mental health wellness team, on-campus support, onboarding your staff, programming, and then resources. And at the end, we will also have some scenarios, case studies for you to work out as well. Like Bill said, we want this interactive. I don't want to be you don't want to hear from me the whole time. So first, I just want to start out just to read the room and see what you have at your campus. I'd like to know what mental health support you have on your campus, whether that looks like counseling services, maybe use off-campus support, academic affairs. If you can kind of each of you just share at your institution what support you have. Who wants to go first?
I can start.
Go ahead.
We utilize our counseling center in a fashion, but we have a separate group that works with us. They call it PURGE. It's an acronym.
Yep.
For the counseling services we provide. Typically utilize a lot of interns to provide some of those counseling services who are finishing their master's degree to be a counselor.
Great, thank you.
University of North Florida.
JU, we actually last year hired a full-time mental health counselor, sports psychologist that works within athletics and has an office within athletics. So we started that last year, and we also still utilize our on-campus too, but we have someone that's just for us.
Great, thank you.
Kennesaw State, we use a mix of on-campus resources with the KSU Counseling Center, as well as contracting externally with the sports psychologists to provide services.
Austin P. We have a full-time mental health counselor within athletics, and then as well as another individual that we contract through to provide services. At GCU, we use our on-campus mental health counseling center, as well as we have a private contract with the off-campus providers.
At Bellarmine University, we have a full-time LCSW that was provided to us by our hospital group, as well as our on-campus counseling services.
Great, thank you.
Stetson University, currently we just have our counseling services on campus.
Queens University Charlotte, we currently have 4 either MSWs or LCSWs through campus counseling that are also part of the hospital system. And then we've contracted out with he's a clinical psychologist, but he's a professor, and he's more of our sports performance and wellness type coach, like mental health coach.
Yeah, thank you.
Central Arkansas, we have on-campus counseling services and then access to mental health psychology professors
Great.
In the community.
Great. Thank you. And you can keep that out. So at UNA, Josh passed it off to me. We use our counseling services as well. We have always had a really great relationship with them, but at the end of the day, we have probably in the past couple of years went to them and we've gotten more support from them. We've kind of made a dotted line to our mental health counselor and not officially added them to our staff, but we do consider them part of us, and that has led us to be more successful in helping our student athletes with mental health. So the next thing is trends of mental health on your campus. Just whoever wants to answer that. A lot of us are going to have same answers, but just kind of see, what did you see this year in this academic year? For us at North Alabama, something that I saw was pressure. Our student athletes were putting a lot of pressure on themselves. We had several new head coaches, and so those head coaches were not creating the pressure for those student athletes. Those student athletes were putting that on themselves. And so I was hearing, I don't know how to handle this pressure, so it's affecting my academics. It is affecting how I play, but it's also affecting everything else that I'm doing. So that's something we saw all across the board this year. Anyone else wants to share?
I'd say at Queens, especially with our transition from D2 to D1, we saw the same thing, a lot of pressure, but it was more the athletes that were there, they expected to win, or they got into winning situations, and then the wheels fell off. And it would happen with a lot of our sports. We'd be up on teams that we shouldn't be beating, and then the pressure just built, and then all of a sudden it burst, and things went downhill. So it was dealing with that, and then dealing with the expectation of coming into a tough conference and competing.
Yeah, very good.
We saw quite a wide variety, and I would say that it's everything that everyone's saying. You know, we had a few student athletes struggle with some disordered eating. You know, we had some people really struggle with even suicidal ideation. You know, we had people struggling coming back from surgery and the stress that was put on them, the expectation to perform, and then, you know, even just some stress that was just from home.
Yeah.
That was definitely leaking over.
Just one of the things that I think we saw a little bit of this year, and we're starting to see it more and more, is the effects of the kids coming in from 2-3 years ago when COVID was occurring while they were in high school. And it ruined their situation playing there. They lost a lot. And it is evident with their coping skills and their ability to deal with now the pressures of coming in at this level. So I think that was one of the things that I think we dealt with a little bit more, being year 3 of our transition especially.
Yeah. Thank you.
I think we've dealt with a little bit of everything, kind of like Stetson, some disordered eating type stuff, some suicidal ideologies, time management issues, so kind of runs the gamut.
Yeah.
So just echo what everyone else has said, but also new coaches coming in with new coaching styles and adjusting to that, and just working on those relationships and expectations and all of that.
Yeah.
At Kennesaw State, I would agree with what a lot of other people have said. I think one of the things that we're starting to see more and more of is pressure from the transfer portal, and not maybe in the traditional sense of if that individual wants to leave, but who may be coming in, or which one of their teammates may be leaving. And then obviously we've also had some coaching turnover in both successful and non-successful situations, and the stress that brings.
I would say JU, probably the same as what everybody else has said, no
Yeah.
really anything opposite
Yeah.
of that. So.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, same here at UNF, really a lot of kids with anxiety, inability to cope, transitioning from high school to college.
Yeah.
Was really the biggest that we saw.
Yeah. Thank y'all for sharing. Like I said, I know a lot of us have the same answers, but it's just, sometimes it's good to hear that somebody else, a university institution, is facing the same thing you are. So as we go into, just by show of hands, who has a mental health or a wellness team within your athletic department? You? Perfect. So this is something at North Alabama that we started a couple of years ago, and I truly think it has made a difference in how we support our student athletes. So on that, within that team, these are people that I say you must have. But then it can go beyond that scope. I know some people have their athletic director on there. They may have another representative from campus on there as well, but it starts with you guys, athletic training staff. I think you are the most important people because, again, you're with them more than any of us. And so you hear and see and experience with them probably more than anybody else, even their coaches. SWA, valuable component there. Student athlete welfare representative, or if you have a student athlete development individual in that role. Academics as well is important. Strength and conditioning, again, I think strength and conditioning with you guys, y'all are with them the most. And then student counseling services representative, we added that position because again, we made that relationship with our on-campus facility and added them, and it's kind of changed the dynamic. So with that, you can add whoever you want to this team. But why is this team important? So for an example, I think one of our first meetings, we had a concern from the academic side. The student athlete is a great student. They have been all 3 years they've been here. They don't really miss class, have a good GPA, do what they're supposed to, but grades have dropped, attendance has dropped, so has anybody else seen anything? Well, from that point, the strength and conditioning coach mentioned, yeah, I think the demeanor has changed. Training staff mentioned, yeah, I've seen a different change in personality and attitude from that individual. So that right there showed us that there's more going on. Because a lot of times we think in our area, okay, it's just an academic issue, the classes are harder. But within that team, we're seeing that something else is going on. And so that led us to have a conversation with that student athlete, and they did, in fact, need to go to counseling services, and it's been a huge benefit for them. But they just needed somebody to approach them and have that conversation with them. But that's why this team is important. If you don't have this on your campus, I highly recommend it. It's going to bring everything together for you and be able to support your student athletes a lot more. So the referral process. I know for every campus, the referral process to counseling services looks different. A lot of it may be the same. We, I think, have found a process that works really well for us. So just a scenario, an academic advisor comes to you all and says, hey, I'm really worried about this student athlete. I've seen a lot of red flags. Say this is after a wellness meeting or in the time period you're not meeting. So something needs to be done with that student, and we need to find them some support and some help. That ATC is going to reach out to that student athlete and have that conversation. Sometimes it's not the most fun, and it's for sure not the most comfortable conversation you're going to have. But you get to have that meeting. With us, we have a referral form, and that student athlete fills that out while they're talking to the athletic trainer, okay? And that's part of their referral form that we will send over to counseling services. But in reality, I'm going to use a phrase, you can lead a horse to water, but we can't make him drink it. So a lot of times the student athlete, it's their responsibility to make that appointment with counseling services. We can't make that appointment for them. We can give them the number, we can show them the building, we can give them the email address, but as you all know, they've got to do it. So they're responsible for that appointment. For us, if that student athlete meets with a counselor and they sign a disclosure saying that information can be shared with us, then in that wellness team meeting, we don't get to know everything, obviously, but we do get to know at least that they're attending and that they have a plan for their health moving forward. And to me, that's huge. That's why having that counseling services representative part of your wellness team is so important, because they can share, hey, they made an appointment and they have been attending, or hey, they keep making appointments and they're not attending. So we know that they're not receiving help. What steps need to happen next? So onboarding staff. I think sometimes we assume that staff members know all things, and in reality they don't. And so just like our student athletes, they don't know what they don't know. And so when you're onboarding your staff, if it's beginning of the year meeting, let them know who is on that wellness team. I recommend just a sheet of paper. This is something we are hoping to implement, of who is on that wellness team. Who do they represent? what department they represent, and how can you get in contact with them. So if they run across a student athlete who is sharing information with them and they're trying to figure out how to help them, then you know who to send them to, okay? How can they help? Again, who is on the team? But also encourage your staff members to pay attention. Pay attention to these student athletes. If they're noticing that they are acting different, their personality has changed, their grades have changed, they don't see them around, they're not showing up for treatment, they're not showing up for tutoring or study hall, is something more going on there. And then awareness of resources. Just as it is important for our students to know their resources, it's important for us, because also where they need to know who you are to send them to you, but also how can they help them right there in that moment. Hey, I don't have to call over to the training room to get this information. I have it right here, and I can share counseling services where it's at, but also, hey, here's a time management workshop. Here's your resources that we have for you. And then algae, we will talk about on the next slide. Mental health first aid. Who in this room has participated? A lot of fun, yep. When I first heard it was all day, I was like, oh boy. And then I've actually ended up, obviously utilized it for this presentation, but I've gone back to it a lot. And so our wellness team completed the course in the summer, and then this summer we're requiring our head coaches to complete that as well, because they have expressed interest on how can I help? How can I help you guys and our student athletes? So with algae, a little koala bear up there. So approach and assess the risk. So when you're sitting down with a student, what is the concern for the student athlete? You're going to make sure you're talking to them, and so you're sitting them down, figuring out what is the concern and what is the risk to that student athlete as well. And then you're going to listen non-judgmentally. Sometimes that can be hard. They're going to say things that you can't believe they're saying. You can't believe they're saying that about themselves or that they would feel that way. But you have to really hear them and be accepting, even if you don't agree with what they're saying. G, give reassurance and information. Sometimes that's all student athletes, that's all they want. They just need a reassurance that maybe it's not going to be okay, but like you're patient with them, you're going to encourage them, and you're going to give them the resources they need, okay? Encourage professional help. This is hard for me, I will admit, when I sit down and talk with student athletes, because you're trying to remove that stigma. That's what we're doing here today. So I'm always hesitant when it gets to that part of the conversation. Some are like, yes, I need help. Some of them are still very, I don't need help. Why would I need to go get professional help? I'm not going to that. People are going to know. And so with that, just tell them it's okay. I have even shared with student athletes like, hey, I've been to counseling before, and I was able to share all this and get it off my chest, and that changed their perspective. And they shared that with me later, like, you sharing this with me changed my perspective, took the stigma away, that even as an adult and as a grown-up in the working field, like, it's okay. Encourage self-help and other support strategies. This is something we did at a mental health lunch and learn with our student athletes, an activity, and we asked them to do Post-it notes, one side of what are some healthy self-help that you do, that self-care that helps you. We also ask them to write the unhealthy self-care that they may do or they know it's unhealthy. And I learned a lot of things that I didn't need to know that we may be doing that's unhealthy, but that I asked for it. But we keep those sticky notes, and sometimes I've had 2 student athletes ask me, like, hey, what all were on those sticky notes? Like, I need something other than my self-care is not working. What's something else I can do? And they had a lot of great ideas. So it's cool to ask them, what do they go to relax? What do they go to just blow off steam, stress, and kind of get away from the athletic piece of their world. So programming, this is my passion. I want to find programming that helps our student athletes, whether it looks all the same or it looks different. So with that, we have preventative programming. These are things you want to do to hopefully prevent a situation from happening. Or if it does, then they have the resources and they're already aware of them. We're not having to work so much on the back end of it. So preseason meetings, just like you do onboarding for your staff, in your preseason meetings, share all the resources for their student athletes so they know going into it, yes, it's their first day and they may not remember it and they're going to feel really overwhelmed. But at some point they're going to remember, oh yeah, they talked about this and this and this, and here's where I can get help in those areas. Again, they don't know what they don't know. They do not know unless you share with them, because they're for sure not going to read an email. I'm sure all of you in this room are aware of that. So just sharing that with them, sharing your program at the beginning of the semester. But as you do that, look for the trends. I'm sure every trend that we mentioned earlier, all of it didn't just happen in the fall, okay? It happened throughout the semester. And so there may be, you see something going on with a couple of different student athletes, different teams, we need to add a program in there. We need to add a lunch and learn session to be able to help right then. Because we can't read, we can think that the trends are going to be the same every year, but there's always new issues, always new things that are going to come up that affect them. Huddle is something that we have established at North Alabama. It is ran through Student Counseling Services. We like to consider it a small group. We in athletics are not involved. We do not know who attends. We do not show up that night. It's at 7 o'clock on Mondays, and they get to sit down with Student Counseling Services as a group and just, again, I'm not in there, but they get to discuss different things and things they're going through. And I had a student athlete. We tried it in the fall to see what it would look like. I had a student athlete come to me and he said, you know, Miss Millie, thank you so much for Huddle and for starting that programming. I was like, well, I didn't, but Student Counseling Services did, and they care about you guys. And he said, well, it really helped me. It showed me that I'm not alone. I'm not alone at this university. I'm not alone in my team, that other student athletes are facing what I'm facing. And he said, can we do it twice a month? Absolutely. 100%, that's easy. And so we have moved to twice a month, and to me that's been a huge change in our student athletes being able to, they may not want to be at that one-on-one with a counselor because they're not comfortable. Maybe they don't have the time frame to be able to do it, so we do it at 7 o'clock on a Monday night, and their availability to go. But again, they're not alone, and I think that helps them almost more than anything. And then a mental health screening. This is new for us. Anybody else do mental health screenings? Great, awesome. We started this through our health services on campus. We do it before our physicals are done, and so they're able to help them before they leave that room. If red flags have come up on that mental health screening, they're able to help them make an appointment. They're able to give them a card, whatever they focused on. So if they are having anxiety, there is a card on anxiety. There are resources to help them, and they help them right then. We're able to know, hey, 85% of your student athletes are experiencing anxiety or depression or whatever that's broken down into. So again, that's your preventative to help you as you move forward. So intentional programming. So this may be after a mental health crisis has happened to a student athlete at your campus, okay? And so with that, individual support and counseling. Again, some student athletes, and depending how insurance works at your institution and all the things, they are refusing to go to an on-campus counselor, okay? So what does off-campus look like? How can you support them? But finding that individual support. Group counseling is available, I'm sure, on all your campuses just through counseling services. Sometimes they don't want to be around other student athletes in group counseling. They just want to be with student athletes that are just regular students that are on your campus to go through and walk through that phase. And then team sessions. We've seen that, something has happened with a student athlete on a team and it affected all of them. They were all not okay. They felt disconnected from their team. They felt lonely or sad. So how do we come together as a team? What speakers can you bring in to better serve them and better help them? So crisis emergency, hopefully y'all can see that, emergency plan. I know this says a student athlete in crisis, but also like if you have a coworker that's in crisis, if you're in crisis, what steps are you taking to help? And so the biggest thing is stay calm. When a student athlete comes in, stay calm, figure out what exactly is going on, determine what step is needed to take. Is there someone you need to call? Or can you stay calm and have that conversation with them? If you need to get help, again, most things, of course, happen after hours. So student counseling services, but also if you are in a situation you need to call 911, please do so. You all know not to leave that person left alone. Stay with them. And then I think the big component of it is de-escalate. If you feel safe with that student athlete, speak calmly. Listen to what they are saying. Again, listen non-judgmentally like we talked about earlier. Give space and offer options. Again, those resources that you have, what are our options right now? Is it going to counseling? Is it going to a hospital? And having that conversation, and then don't disagree or argue with them. Again, that goes back to we may not agree with what they're saying, but we're going to listen to them and we're not going to judge them, and we're going to figure out the best plan of action. And then complete a referral form. Again, you can send that, if however your campus works, you send that referral to your office or you take care of it. There is also, for most campuses, a referral form online that you can fill out anonymous. So resources. Again, if you've never done mental health first aid, highly recommend that. Suicide Prevention Lifeline. Bill will talk more about that today. Mental health screening, working with your health services to get that done. And then a care and wellness team, establishing that within your department, and then make that relationship with student counseling services. If you do not have that on your campus, I highly recommend it. Like I said, we did, but we just took it to the next level of how we can help specifically to student athletes. So we got some case studies. We have 3, so if y'all just get in groups of 3 and we'll pass those out. We'll give you like 5 or 6 minutes to devise a plan. You'll read the case study and then what steps you're going to take to help that student that is in a mental health crisis. And then if you'll pick a representative to come up and share what your plan is. However y'all.
we scrimmaged. We went scrimmage. Yeah. Is the mic on?
Yes.
Do you want me to read the case study?
Yes, if you'll read the case study to everybody.
Okay, we had case number 1. You are an athletic academic advisor at Lions University. A women's soccer student athlete comes into your office during the middle of the semester. She seems very discouraged and sad. In addition to feeling discouraged, her shy personality brings challenges when it comes to making friends and building connections. She often feels isolated and lonely on campus, affecting her overall well-being and motivation to engage in college. She wants to find a sense of belonging and build a social network, but struggles overall. She explains that she is not enjoying college soccer or life in general. As you continue to talk to the student athlete, you see more signs of depression, and she's also not the same person as when you met with her previous times. What steps are you going to take to help the student athlete? So we would encourage her to schedule with the Student Counseling Center. We'd speak with the mental health team regarding her overall well-being, so everyone kind of is monitoring what's going on with her. And then if she's uncomfortable with doing one-on-one counseling, if Lions University had huddle sessions, we would encourage her to at least attend a huddle session so she could see what that was like. If we knew the student athlete well enough and her team and her coach, this may be a situation where you'd want her to, approach her coach and let her coach know, or discuss with her team, her teammates, to help get her engaged with the other student athletes in her sport.
Very good. Anybody have anything to add to how they would help their student athlete? No? Very good. Case 2, y'all on that side.
You're an athletic trainer for the sport of men's basketball at University of Purple and Gold. While on the road for a competition, an assistant coach approaches you saying they are concerned about one of the student athletes. This is a freshman student who excelled academically in high school but faces challenges with transitioning to college-level coursework. As a student athlete, he is overwhelmed by the increased workload, unfamiliar study techniques, the fast pace of lectures, and early morning workouts. As a result, his grades are suffering and he's feeling discouraged. The academic stress is taking a toll on his mental and physical well-being, resulting in increased anxiety, sleep disruption, and loss of appetite. The student athlete has a history of mental health concerns and puts a lot of pressure on himself and has admitted to suicidal thoughts in the past. You continue to keep a closer eye on the student athlete the remainder of the trip. You notice a change in attitude and demeanor in the student athlete on the trip. The roommate of the student athlete has now expressed that his teammate would lock himself in the bathroom for long periods of time and would be yelling at himself. With this information and what you've observed, what steps are you taking to help the student athlete? We kind of all agreed that our first step would be try to either remove him from the situation. If you're still at a hotel, get him down to the lobby or get him to go for a walk to try to talk about things. We're lucky with our partnership with Atrium. We've got a 24/7 hotline that they can call. But if all else fails and he admits to being suicidal on the road, I'm calling 911,
Yeah.
and I'm not letting him out of my sight.
Very good.
So.
Very good.
Obviously offer resources if that we need.
Yes, of course. Yes. You always have those not on campus situations. Case 3.
Okay, case 3. You are the athletic trainer at PTD University for football and baseball. There's a student athlete on the football team who's the team captain that works very hard and leads the team very well. He always has a positive attitude and willing to help his teammates. He has had a 4.0 all 3 years at the university. In the fall of his junior year, he had an injury during the game, tearing his ACL. He had surgery at the end of the season, seemed upbeat and optimistic during surgery and at the start of rehab and recovery. He started noticing that he was coming in to the athletic training room a lot less, and when he did not want rehab. The academic advisor comes to you to discuss behavioral changes such as frequent absences, tardiness to class, lack of interest, and trouble paying attention. Previously, he was a good student, made good grades, turned in assignments on time, and rarely missed class. The student athlete shares that he wants to quit football and school. He doesn't see himself getting any better, doesn't see a purpose to life anymore if he isn't playing football. So I think we discussed that sitting down with the athlete, first of all, encouraging them, I think is the number one thing about life and football, and that there is more than just football, but we're trying to get them to stay in school. I think the academic advisor is the key, trying to get them back involved, and again, explaining to the student athlete the resources that are available so that they can seek those services or help them get those services. to get care. You know, they've done a spiral, I think it seems like.
Yeah.
You know, whatever triggered that, was it the surgery or was it a combination of things that triggered that? I think that's what we're trying to figure out. So bringing in counseling services to help direct that, I think, was kind of the important part of that. I think there's other people that can be involved, coaches, you know, as well from the sports side, you know. The athletic trainer that's working with them on their rehab, you know, from the medical side as well. So,
Yeah. Great, thank you. Great job on your case studies. Questions? Anybody have questions? Got some tunes up there. All right. Oh, go ahead.
Do you know for those huddle sessions what they talk about? Is it
Um,
just they let the athletes lead it, or is it counseling services lead it?
Counseling services, she said she opens it up. Sometimes there's been a couple where she said she just asks, like, how's everything going? How's your week? What have you experienced this week? And she said there's been times it's just gone from there. They've all just shared what, you know, not into detail with me, but just what that leads to, and what they're facing that week. And so sometimes they're all helping each other. She said a lot of times I'll just step back and observe, and she doesn't have to step in. We have added, they had a male, so they did break him up into male and female at one point. So I can't remember, Jot, she had topics, but sometimes she doesn't even make it to the topics because they're just leading into what is happening with them, and they end up supporting each other. And so sometimes it's just, hey, I'm getting off my chest what I'm experiencing at my practice and with my team, and you know, those hard losses and not finishing in competition and everything like that. So yeah, sometimes it is topic, but a lot of times they just take off. So
We did them once a month, and actually our deputy athletic director and our athletic advisors are the ones that ran them. Same type of thing. They would have a topic, and if things worked on that topic great, but more it was just the student athletes getting to know each other, sharing different things. So it wasn't even necessarily mental health, but even just trying to integrate the student athletes because that's what they want. They want to know about other people in the department. They want to know about their coaches and administrators are invited too.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like the whole department.
And it has led to some of our student athletes actually making individual appointments because of that. So I think that's another positive that we've seen come out of it as well.
We've actually morphed into two different ones. It started 2 years ago. A group of our younger student athletes started their own group. They called it Finger for the Dolphins.
Yeah.
But they started that group just to kind of talk to each other and share what they were experiencing through their rehab or with their injuries. And then when we added our new sports psychologist, that kind of morphed into a separate group where they talked about all the stuff other than that. And then they actually started a third one. You could probably morph some of these into one, but they started a third one with trying to deal with death and those kind of things, like traumatic experiences. So they kind of separate even more to kind of, I guess, create safer spaces for certain topics. So.
Yeah, that's great. It's great that they did a lot of that on their own too.
Yeah.
That just shows you they're thirsting for it. They want it.
Question for the group: When do you involve, or do you ever involve the parents? When do you involve, or do you ever involve the parents?
When they sign off that you can. You can.
Yeah.
I'll speak to that.
We had once.
We had one case 2 years ago with an international student athlete that didn't want parents to know because of the sensitivity of the subject. And it came to a point where the athlete was institutionalized and finally opened up and said, my parents need to know the full story. So having a conversation with someone that's 6 hours away and six hours in time zone as well is great. And they find out that their daughter's been institutionalized. But again, it's on the student athlete, and it's convincing them that it's okay to tell your parents. They're another support group. They're another network for you to lean on to have your back. And this athlete, when her parents flew over, like the gates opened and she was more honest, and it worked. You know, she's better now and hasn't had issues since. So.
Our case is very similar. It was a bipolar athlete that we felt like needed to be institutionalized, and we had to convince him that we needed to let your parents
parents know. So we actually had to sit down with his parents, counseling, and then, walk through his case, because they didn't believe it. They didn't think he was bipolar, but.
Well, and then obviously, if you're dealing with suicide, we've dealt with a case where we had to contact the parents because we weren't, student athlete was hospitalized and there was no response. So that was obviously our contact was to get a hold of those parents.
I think one of the major things in dealing, now that we have a full-time counselor on staff, is there are a lot of laws and rules that they have to follow directly. They are very hesitant to be able to share information without the proper releases, without the proper things in place. So you got to be really careful about how you step or when you step in. And I don't want to say overstep, but sometimes contacting parents without their direct permission to do so is going to put yourself in a bind. So you got to be very hesitant to do that. Self-harm, things like that, some of those rules immediately disappear.
Yeah.
There are things that say, okay, certain laws, certain rules, certain regulations are swept away because they have tried to hurt themselves, because they've had suicide ideations. So there are more doors that get open when you do that. But you got to be really careful about involving people that they don't want involved yet. They got to get there before we do.
Yeah. Agree. Anybody else? Question? All right. Thank you all very much.
Anna, thank you very much. Appreciate that. Greatly appreciate all the discussion, the participation. This is exactly what we're looking for, sharing this information. We're going to be able to have some time towards the end to add these things up, take some notes, add some things when questions come up as you're going through or something that you think about. We're hoping that towards the end that we'll be able to sort of summarize and do some of this and answer some of these general kind of questions. We're going to try to get and move through as quickly as our schedule allows, but we also understand and want to give you an opportunity to get up and stretch. So look at your telephone, your phone, so you can see an exact time. We're going to take about a 10-minute break, but we're going to begin at the top of the hour. So feel free to move about, and we'll be back shortly. Thank you very much. Read a little bit about our next presenter. Again, I thought our first session and the feedback that you were giving, the interaction, is exactly what we're looking for. And hopefully that you're experiencing some positive stuff from exchanging and learning about what the other universities are doing. So Caroline Wasserman will graduate in August of this year with her master's degree in marriage and family therapy from Lipscomb. During her graduate work, she was doing internships both at Lipscomb University Counseling Center and Lipscomb Family Therapy Center. Caroline was also an intern for the athletic department, helped streamline the referral process between athletics and the University Counseling Center. So obviously it's very important to what we're talking about. She received her undergraduate degree in youth ministry, where she was also the manager for the softball program at Lipscomb. She has a passion for working with athletes, and during her time in the program, she changed her career and moved towards the mental health field. Her long-term goal is to work in an athletic department at a university where she can help athletes off the field become the healthiest versions of themselves. She's a native of Jasper, Alabama, but moved to Nashville about 7 years ago, and that's where her home is now. Please welcome Caroline Wasserman.
How's everybody doing? Good? All right. So yes, as Mr. Bill said, I am about to be done, about to graduate with my master's, and so this really means a lot to me, and I'm really passionate about what I'm talking about. So that may come out, and I may just go on some tangents, so feel free to reel me back in. So kind of what we had talked about in some of the discussion of last session was a big transitional period about coming from high school to college, and about how really important that is, right? And so they came from being a big fish in a little pond. Most of the time, these athletes, they are big names where they're coming from, right? Their high school knows who they are, but probably only knows a little bit about them, right? They may know that they play the sport, they may know that they're going to a D1 university, but they don't know much beyond that, right? Like, how many people are their true friends? And then they're coming from being the big name or the top dog into a really big, a big pond, a big university, and becoming that small fish. So where does their identity lie? Where are they placing their values? Do they only see themselves as an athlete, or do they see themselves outside of their sport, right? Are they the smart kid? Are they the funny kid from their family? Where do they place their identity? And hopefully you have some kids who also may do that in a religion. Do they believe in Jesus? Do they believe in something else? Or do they kind of take on that identity of themselves and say, I am an athlete, right? Those kids you may need to worry about a little more, because say you get an injury, say they don't get the playing time that they need, or they feel like they deserve. And if their whole identity is wrapped around being an athlete, when that doesn't happen, then they really are going to suffer. Where are they coming from, right? Are we having a in-state kid? Are you having someone who is from the same town where they can have family and support coming in? Or do you have someone who's from out of state, or kind of like what you guys were talking about, do you have someone from out of country where they know no one, right? They're coming in and have no support other than being 6, 7, 8 hours away, different time zones. Where do they have the support? How is their family like? Do they have the support? Are they only coming to college because they need to go pro and help their family? That adds a lot of pressure, right? It's not just, hey, this is for fun, or hey, I have this passion. This is really like, hey, I need to do this and I can't do anything else because I need to save money for my family, or save money for my friends, or from my siblings, I need to take care of them. What is their family life like? What kind of relationships do they have outside of their sport? Do they have romantic relationships? How are those, right? I'm sure you've seen an athlete where, you know, they're in love and hunky-dory and all things are really great, and then they break up with their boyfriend or girlfriend, and then the whole world is crashing down, right? And it really affects who they are. How are their friendships? Do they have good relationships with their family outside of their sport? Do they have bad relationships? Do they talk to their family? Do they not talk to their family? Do they have people to lean on? Are they coming from really great support, or are they not? What resources how are they acting with their coaches or teammates? What's motivating them? Do they want to go pro? Is that the only way that they're going to college? And then kind of what Anna was talking about too, of this transitional period of like, do they have resources? Do you guys have resources at your university? You have them coming in, but do you have any resources for the seniors or the fifth years that are going out and their whole identity crisis if they're not going pro? Hey, what in the world? My loss of identity. I literally have been playing this sport for however long. I have a lot of questions. Body image issues too, right? They're not, when they leave your university, they are not exercising and working out as much as they did. They needed to compete for their sport. How can we put some programs or resources in place to help the transition out athlete? Does anyone have at their university something like that? No. Okay. That's fine. Okay, and then the high demand. You guys know it as well as anyone about what is the demand for their student athlete. I'm gonna throw some out, and then if you guys can think of any other ones that I haven't thrown out, please feel free. Weights, practice, classes, friends, traveling, early morning practices, late nights for staying up for class. They're trying to have a social life outside of their sport, right? It is college. What's the team culture like? That is really going to affect the student athlete's mental health. They're missing classes for their sport, whether that be someone who is a STEM major and they're missing really, really important classes, or it's in season and they have to show up for however many classes for whatever their major is. Their social media life, this is getting really big, right? Especially at bigger universities. Like how popular are they on social media? Some kids really care about that and some don't. NIL deals, I'm not really sure how the ASUN deals with that, if you guys have people who have NIL deals or not, but that is also being playing a big factor in student athletes' lives. Fame, again, on social media or within their university or school. Again, do they kind of lean into that student athlete mentality of, hey, I have to be top dog, I have to be the cool athlete on campus, I have to do this or I have to do that. Pressure from parents and other family members. Injury obviously plays a really big component. And then playing time, what does that look like for a student athlete, right? Like their mental health when they are playing versus when they're not playing, and how does that look? I think that was it, yeah. Does anyone have anything else that they can think of?
So relationships with their coaches.
Yeah, that's a big one too.
Work. Some of our student athletes who are on scholarship have to.
Oh, yeah.
Have to work in order to go to school.
Yeah. Anything else? No? Okay. This is a lot. And I was looking up, I was trying to do some research about how much out of a week this takes. And kind of what Anna was talking about for self-care. You see all of this stuff that they have to do that is required of them as a student athlete, right? And they signed up for this, right? Like, we're not opposed, we know that, right? Like, they signed up for the traveling and the classes and practice and weights and all this stuff, right? But it still takes a high demand on them. A lot is asked of them, and how much of their time left do they have for self-care, whatever that looks like. And how much of it is spent on their phone, on social media. How much of it, right, is outside of work or their relationship with their coaches or their other dynamics. Do they really realistically have any time to spend on their mental health? And a lot of them would say no, because there is such a high demand for all of this other stuff too. But how can we, as athletic training staff and other people who are supporting them, how can we make sure that we are telling them, hey, I prioritize my mental health, so you guys should too, and how do we do that? Yeah, the things that are required of student athletes can lead to physical and mental exhaustion, but it doesn't have to. You guys, as I know that also, like, there's a lot of required of y'all. Y'all are literally there, if not more than the student athlete is. And so I'm sure that the high demand that they have to face, you guys also have that as well. Okay, so we're gonna go over possible diagnosis or criteria that student athletes could be susceptible to. I did not put all of them on here, but I did just go with a few. and then we're going to talk about some that you guys may not be as familiar with. So adjustment disorder, is anybody familiar with what adjustment disorder is? Some people are. Okay. I'm going to briefly touch on this. I had slides for all of these, but it was just way too much jargon and just like didn't need to be on here. But adjustment disorder is kind of like what I was talking about earlier in that transitional period of coming from high school to college, or injury, or playing to not playing. And how does that athlete transition? Are they handling it well? Are they not handling it well? Sometimes that comes with anxiety. Sometimes that comes with loss of sleep, not eating as much. So it really just depends. This adjustment disorder, I believe, should last no longer than 6 months. If it does, then it becomes another diagnosis. But I just wanted to kind of throw that out there. I know that this is not like y'all's realm of expertise, but that is something that you could see from your student athlete. Generalized anxiety disorder, eating disorders, major depressive disorder, family distress. Now, this is not a clinical diagnosis, but we're going to kind of go over what family distress looks like. Tough man syndrome. Again, this is not a clinical diagnosis, but I know an image came up in your head when I said this, of whatever that looks like. Suicidal thoughts, which I'm going to briefly touch on, but Mr. Bill's going to take it away next time. And then performance anxiety. So again, these are the three that I'm going to talk about that aren't clinical diagnosis, but really take a toll on a student athlete. So the definition of family distress is factors outside of a person's control that is within the confines of a family system. So what I mean by that is, since I am an MFT, I think in like systems language, and basically that kind of jargon means that I see the world through a family system, right? So for you guys, the athletic training staff is a whole family system. The team is a family system. But what we're talking about here, we're talking about like the family of origin, the mom, the dad, the grandparents maybe, the brother, the sister, whoever kind of raised them, their family back at home. So when I talk about family distress, that's kind of what I'm going with, or what your student athlete would consider their family. Parents getting a divorce, right? I can't, if you don't want to raise your hand, but how many student athletes have you had there, everything are going great, right? And then they get a phone call, hey, mom and dad are getting a divorce. And that like wrecks their world. Parents or family members getting sick. I remember when I was in school, I had a few of my family members pass away and had cancer. And so during that time, I was not myself. And you guys know that if you get a diagnosis or your family member gets a diagnosis, it hits really hard. And you would love to be able to think about whatever is right in front of you, but you can't because you're thinking about Grandma Sue or mom or dad or whatever it is. Moving houses or states, conflict with siblings, grandparents getting older, fighting with parents or adult figures, parents getting a new job. What I will say about this is when I was in my undergrad and I was a manager of the softball team, right before people, our team would step onto the field, our coach would say, leave it outside the gate. Whatever it is, if you have to take a few minutes to take a deep breath, and then when you step onto this field, when you step onto this turf, whatever it might be, when you step onto this court, take everything that was happening in your life, in school, in practice, or anything else besides what you're doing right now, leave it outside, be 100% focused, right? And we would love to say that every student athlete can do that. Reality is, if they are going and dealing with any of this or anything else, the reality of that's probably not true. They probably can't. They're thinking about everything else. They're thinking about the fight that they had with their girlfriend or boyfriend. They're thinking about the fight that they had with their siblings or their grandma or their parents or whatever it might be. So how can we make sure that we're recognizing that, right? And some student athletes are going to be like, yeah, it was really hard. You know, my mom and my dad are getting a divorce and that really sucks. And you're aware of that. Some, you're not so aware. But, you know, how can we look at the demeanor of our student athletes and say, hey, it looks like there's something else going on. And how can we help them? Whether that is giving them to counseling services, or maybe that's sitting them down in your office and saying, hey, I'm noticing something different from you. What's going on? So what I'm briefly going to talk about a little bit of suicidal thoughts. This is a scale and spectrum, and kind of like what Anna and Mr. Bill are going to talk about. we don't want to wave the red flag of, hey, we want to call 911 when something isn't as serious, right? We want to make sure that we are capable of handling it ourselves, of staying calm, of making sure we know who to refer to and who not to refer to in times of crisis. Does the student athlete have any thoughts of harming themselves? Do they have a plan? Does this student athlete have access to means to follow through with the plan? And do they have the intent of killing themselves? And intent is really huge. And so we want to make sure that when we're on the scale and spectrum, if we have something that is, maybe here, we don't want to be at a 10, right? We don't want to be calling 911 when something we may be able to de-escalate that sooner. And tough man syndrome, and this is kind of the part where I'm hoping to get a little bit of class participation. I have a few friends of mine were either former D1 athletes at Lipscomb or still there, and I asked them kind of to give me a quote of what this means for them. And then one of them said, I felt like I had something to prove, so I played. I knew that I was hurting, but I didn't want to let other people down. I needed to secure my position on the team. Or I'd rather be hurting and playing than healing and on the bench. Does anyone else think of anything or have a scenario or can think of a story of when they saw an athlete like this?
I have a student athlete who has a very interesting family dynamic, and his, so his freshman year, he was obviously hurting, but it was his non-dominant arm, so he just kind of shook it off for a long time and never said anything. And when we do talk, he's been the hardest one that I've been able to build a relationship with. And I've quickly found out from others that it's more because he views me as a threat. That if he gets too close or we build any kind of relationship, that automatically would equate to him being out because he knew that he was in pain. And he also, when he did start breaking those walls down, and we found out about family life, parents kind of, or at least the dad runs the show and makes decisions for him. And so getting parents involved, we were talking about consent before and getting parents involved. And until it became a surgical situation, it was very adamant that the parents would not be involved, even though they got my email from online and my office phone. And, so it was quite a situation, because anytime the coaches asked him, I'm fine, to me, didn't say a word. Wouldn't say I'm fine, just wouldn't say a word. And then in the locker room, would talk to some of the other guys. But so it was quite a difficult situation that we've unfortunately had to deal with for the last actual couple of years at this point. So, yeah, I just feel like that is him.
Yeah.
I think more when you talk about the mental health space, it's more that, men don't cry, men aren't soft, they don't need help, mentally. We're tough. I think that would how I would consider the tough man syndrome.
I feel some of the things that we've experienced at KSU here, the tough man syndrome, I guess, would be more so coming maybe from a coaching standpoint. Like the student athlete may be feeling like, yes, I want to shut it down. I want to take a step back and really evaluate things, but they may not have the support from the coaches in that regard, and the coach is coming down and saying, hey, you're fine, suck it up, everything's good, that sort of thing. And they feel like they don't have the option to take a step back. So I think that's something that we've battled here and there over the past few years that I feel like is a very real thing across the board, depending on what kind of coach and what coaching style you may be dealing with.
Anyone else? Okay. I have a few quick stories. We have a girl who a couple years ago played on our soccer team, and she was on the road, but I can't remember where she was at. Maybe it was a conference game. I can't really tell you. But I was watching online, and she got tackled hard from behind, and she ended up really hurting herself, really hurting her back. And she shrugged it off, and she's an incredible player and really tough, is what we consider like really, really tough. And she continued to play. It's like, no, I'm fine. Don't worry about it. And come to find out, she played a few more games until she couldn't handle it anymore, until the pain really took over. And she's going to have problems with her back for the rest of her life, instead of, hey, dealing with it in right then and there. And she still continues. I talked to her today. She was playing in a summer league, and she got tackled the other day, and it still hurts. And what are the costs, right? What are they outweighing with saying, hey, I'm going to stick it out, I'm going to be tough, instead of, hey, I want to show up for my team, I don't want to ride the bench. What if my coach takes me out? What's going to happen? What's going to happen in my starting spot? And then the second story is we had a girl who has a very severe peanut allergy. She played on the softball team. And there was one day she was eating in the calf, and somehow, I don't think she ate peanut butter, but she ate something that had peanuts in it, had a severe allergic reaction, almost had to go to the hospital. The athletic trainer was there, they gave her EpiPen, and she was fine. The athletic trainer told her, hey, I think we should sit out today at practice. I don't think that's a good idea, right? Take a day off. No big deal, right? Like, she had an allergic reaction. She got a phone call from her dad that said, you better be at practice. You can't miss, and the coach is going to take your spot if you don't. And so she threw a fit and was pissed. The athletic trainer had a call from her father, and she felt like she couldn't take a day off because there was pressure from her family. And so we would love to say that parents are being super supportive, and that's awesome. And there are a lot of student athletes whose parents are like, I'm just happy that you're doing something you love. And then you also have parents who maybe are living vicariously through their student athlete. And just like that one, where it didn't matter that his daughter had an allergic reaction, her butt better be on the practice field. And so I think she ended up not practicing that day. The dad got super upset. But, what can you do, right? So next we're going to talk about what is inside your scope of practice and what is outside your scope of practice. I think this is super important to know. You guys are really educated in a lot of ways, but there's also limits to everyone's scope, right? There's a lot of things that I can do, and then there's a lot of things that I can't do. And so I want to just briefly touch on those. So what you can do and what I think is really beneficial, encourage sleep, eating right, rest, self-care. You guys have the power to implement days off in recovery. Tell the coach, hey, this student athlete needs a break. And some of them do, some of them don't. But I think you guys play a really pivotal role in what that looks like. Positive reinforcement instead of negative emotions. Help them set realistic goals and amounts of pressure, right? Kind of like what Anna was saying, they put so much pressure on themselves. Sometimes it's way too much. Sometimes you need to say, hey, listen, this game has not changed from when you were 8 to when you were 15 to in high school to now. You're playing the same game. How can we make sure to just relax and go have fun, right? And they do so much better and perform so much better when they are relaxed. Keeping an eye on them at meals and notice any weight loss. I lived with a girl who played basketball at Lipscomb, and she was telling me that her athletic trainer would keep an eye on their student athletes when they were at meals and notice whether some of them were eating the right amount or some of them weren't eating at all. And so how can we make sure we're having those conversations? Or, hey, I think this needs to be referred to the dietitian on staff. And then watch out for safe communication patterns from coaches and players. There are some coaching and their coaching staff to players who talk really, really well and have great relationships and things are going great. And then you have some who the relationship is kind of rocky, where the coach might be more harsh or have not as a gentle coaching style. And that's fine, but how can we make sure that we are noticing, hey, are they speaking kindly? Do the players feel safe to speak up? Or kind of like what you were saying, do they not feel like they can have a safe space to talk at all? What is outside your scope of practice? So I obviously am in the mental health field, and I just kind of put some things that I believe to be that you would refer to either counseling services or a psychologist or someone else. If an athlete shares that they've been sad and just can't shake it, obviously this is not your job to sit there and talk to them all the time, right? You guys have a great relationship with them, but sometimes being sad and they just can't shake it or understand why, like you guys have a lot to do, right? Like I was really good friends with our athletic trainer, and she had a lot on her plate, and she had more than one sport. And so she can't sit there and talk to a student athlete 24/7. And that's also not her job. So how can we make sure that you guys are using the best resources of your time and someone else can also be part of that team that Anna was talking about? If an athlete talks about not eating a lot because they want to lose weight or look skinny, how can we monitor that and then also refer them to the dietitian and say, hey, kind of this is what I'm seeing? Diagnosing, just like I would be silly to say that I can tell that when someone tore their ACL, I think it would be kind of silly for you guys to say, hey, I know this person has major depressive disorder, or I think they have anxiety. You kind of putting labels on that for a student athlete might heighten their anxiety or anyway, it takes a lot for the criteria. The DSM-5 TR, which is the new criteria, the book's like this thick of like what it actually takes to diagnose someone with a certain disorder. So it's a long process. So I would just say stick to what you know, and how can we make sure that we are utilizing the team and resources for others. And again, kind of like what I talked about earlier, like your job is really hard and stressful, and we want to make sure that you guys are prioritizing your mental health, right? You can't give what you don't have. And kind of like what Anna was saying and she was sharing when she shared with one of her student athletes, hey, I go to counseling too, I've been before. It really does lower the stigma, right? Like there's nothing wrong with going to see someone. And what I tell a lot of people is it's really great when you have an unbiased person in your life, when they want nothing else but for you to be the happiest and healthiest version of themselves. They don't care about your playing time. They don't care about what color you wear, what number you wear. All they care about is you and your relationships and for you to be happy and healthy. And having someone who's outside of the athletic world honestly might be really good for them. So how can we make sure we're saying those things, encouraging them to go and seek mental health, and that may be something where you guys are saying, hey, I do that too, or I do this for self-care, I do that for self-care. So we're gonna kind of go into a few scenarios, and this isn't gonna be that long, but this is gonna kind of be a little popcorn. So an athlete gets a season or career-ending injury, what do you do? Maybe you can think about, hey, we do this at our university, but this is maybe what I would do differently, or I think we do a really good job of how we handle student athletes who have a season or career-ending injury, or we don't do anything.
I think it's very dependent on the individual. I mean, where they are in their career, how long that they've been playing the sport they're playing, but it's critical that they understand that some of their issues will be that it is part of their identity and they're losing that. And making sure that they understand that you are there for them. Like one of the mottos that we kind of go by in our athletic training room is that we don't just care about these 4 years, we care about the next 40. So what we're trying to do is make sure that when these situations occur, you know that you have support systems, you have counseling, you have us, you have multiple other people that can step in and help you work through this identity crisis that you're going to deal with. Because a lot of athletes, this may be their very first and only injury, and they've never dealt with it before. It is a constant battle understanding who they are. Every athlete's different though. They're all gonna have their own little idiosyncrasies and their period of mourning,
A major injury, losing a season, is a mourning process. So a lot of times, if you know the athlete really well, you sit there and you talk with them, and there are times where I've walked up to them and said, all right, you got 5 minutes to cry. Now we're going to move on, okay? Depends on the athlete. Some of the athletes you may say, okay, I'm going to set you up with our counseling center because you're going to need it, that kind of thing. So it varies. It's a quite variable thing. I don't think there's a plan in place that's cookie cutter for everybody.
You have an athlete who isn't injured but doesn't get any playing time. What do you do?
I think it varies on the athlete and the situation. Like, I think we're all going to have that one athlete that might just come into your office to vent for like 5 seconds, and we're all there for that. Like, we're there to create a safe space where athletes can say what's on their mind. But if it's something that they're going to continuously talk about and it's going to overwhelm them in their daily life and other activities and kind of interject in their moods in general, then that's when our job is to refer them to other resources. And if they're, getting anxiety over it, or their grades are suffering, or it's just kind of become this overwhelming presence in their mind, and that's when we need to refer. But I think it just depends on the situation with the athlete.
All right, last one. If an athlete shares that they've been feeling a lot of pressure from their friends and family and coaches, how do you handle that?
Refer to counseling.
Yeah, that's one you need to suggest they go speak with a medical or mental health professional.
Oh.
Yeah, so I think just destigmatizing that, like, counseling, like, is appropriate in the situation, and holding space for them to just kind of like vent and then say, okay, here's our resources now, and encouraging, self-care, just helping them remind that they get to choose, like, what they're doing, and having their self-care options.
And realistically, all these situations, they need to go talk to their head coach. If they have a season-ending injury and they're having a hard time dealing with it, they should have a relationship with their coaching staff where they feel comfortable talking with them. If they don't, then that's what we're there for as well. But I think in all these instances, I'd say, hey, have you talked to coach? Have you talked to him about your playing time? What can you do to get more playing time? You need to go talk to your coach. If you feel like the coach is pressuring you too much, why don't you sit down and talk to him about it and say, hey, what you're asking of me, I'm not handling well. And so then that coach can learn to coach that student athlete differently.
I think that segues into a question we got from the chat. So how do you educate coaches and staff on mental health issues, especially if the coach or staff may be the source of causing those issues? I guess it's for either Anna or the group.
I think the big piece of that is a lot of times it is coming from the head coach, whether you want to admit it or not. And sometimes the head coach isn't intentionally doing it. That's just how they coach. I think a lot of times our student athletes try to use you all, myself, their strength coach, the academic advisor, the out to not talk to their head coach. And so they think we're going to have those conversations or that we can fix it, when in reality they need to go talk to their coach and have that conversation. But that doesn't mean you just leave them high and dry. You can also share with them ways they can talk to their coach and how to have a healthy conversation. But you're right, our coaches need to know also how to have that healthy conversation with them when they come up with these situations. So I think too that's a piece of the onboarding. When you share the resources and things that are available, give them the opportunity to talk to the wellness team. Hey, this is open, make that space safe for them to come into. Have that conversation of, hey, I'm trying to help this student athlete and I'm not getting anywhere. What can I do differently? And then what resources do we have to help them as well? So.
I think that is a fabulous question, and I'm going to steal a little bit from Caroline and talk about it in terms of from a systems perspective. So I think one of the most important things that you folks have is the access and the act as a liaison to those coaches. And if you look at the coaching staff, and whether they're assistants or whether they're graduate assistants, whatever, the coach is not always the head coach. Certainly the direction is go to your head coach, go to the coach that recruited you, and direct them back there. Of course, it's a great idea. When it doesn't go so well, understanding and knowing the system of the coaching staff as a family. And there's different levels of responsibility. There's different specific responsibilities of those coaches. And so it might not be the head coach that's the most receptive. Maybe often it isn't. Maybe it is the head coach because they make the decisions, that it's difficult and challenging and they don't want to do that, or they're not receptive to it because that's their coaching style. But there's at least 2 or 3 others on that coaching team that are available. And so we get to be close to them. The athletic trainer that works with that particular team, even as a head athletic trainer, if they come to you and the student athlete and you give them the response to talk to their coach, et cetera, you're going to talk to your team. You're going to talk to the AT that's associated with that team. And going back and talking to the coaches team and figuring out which one of those coaches is going to be more receptive and try to get them to be the leader for that. And I think that that's a valuable role. We'll talk a little bit about that in the suicide section as well. But utilizing everybody that's available. It's not just the head coach. It's that entire coaching staff and who's involved with that. And I think most of the time we can find someone that we can liaison with or that we can talk with about these things and kind of help build a bridge if it isn't there to the coach in that situation. That's a great question, though.
Questions from Jeff at EKU. So.
Cool. Any other questions?
Yeah, we got one more question. Do you have policies surrounding mental wellness care for student athletes that have a documented high levels of anxiety or similar diagnosis? Is there a standard level of care that you are making sure you're offering student athletes that come to you with a documented case?
I mean, I think that starts off with your screening, and that's part of your medical history when they come in. If they come in, we've got plenty of athletes that come in with depressive disorders, bipolar, and it's flagging those, making sure your team doctors are aware of it, and then setting them up with counseling from the start. And I think that's part of a good screening process and a medical history on these athletes and setting them up for the best success that they can. And even if they're local, making sure that they can continue that care local, whether it's off campus, if they got to go back home that's 30, 45 minutes away, especially with us being in Charlotte, we got athletes that commute 45 minutes every day. So it's making sure that they still have access.
For us, it starts too with obviously our medical team, but also disability support services. That is a huge contact for us because not only are we trying to make sure that we help them and resource them on our end, but also on the academic end. So disability support services, looking over that documentation that is brought in with that student, they are a huge help for us and communicate with us. And if the consent is signed off for the communication with us, that makes it a whole lot easier as well. But I think that's a huge person or department that can bridge the gap for you, just another component of resource and help to help that student be successful, not only on the athletic side of things, but on the student piece and in their academics as well.
I would also add too, that's really hoping that your student athlete is coming to you guys and the athletic department knows about this diagnosis, right? Because there are some times when I have seen in the University Counseling Center, when you should have a student athlete who gets a diagnosis or has a diagnosis and they don't want to share that with the athletic department. Again, because playing time or going back to the tough man syndrome. They don't want to sit out. They don't want their coaches to see them as weak. They've worked their butt off to get to this place, and they don't want other people around them to see that as a weakness or a disability for them, right? Like, how can we make sure, and that goes back to consent, right? Like, as a mental health provider, I don't have consent to share that information with anyone unless I have a release of information from the student athlete or, again, kind of what we were talking about earlier, does it affect their mental or their physical well-being, right? Are they suicidal? Or are they a risk of harming themselves or others? But other than that, coming from this side, you're really hoping and not really encouraging, because you don't want to push your student athlete or client one way or the other, but hoping that they at some point want to tell the athletic department, want to tell their athletic trainers, hey, this is something that I'm struggling with. So maybe having that conversation from my side of like, hey, have you thought about this? What are your thoughts on this? Is it a good thing, bad thing? Do you feel safe enough to do that? And hopefully you guys and the team, again, for team culture, is creating that and cultivating that environment where they do feel safe enough to share that information.
I have a question. This is kind of for the room, but based off of that, I'm sure you guys have. I know I have, but just interested in if anyone, like how you guys handle it. If players are asking for either the day off, or they've had a crisis, or they're needing to step away for an indefinite amount of time from athletics, and they've specifically said that they don't want their coach involved. Now, obviously, counseling center, they are held, but like if they're telling us, how do you guys handle that? I mean, how do you guys, like, has anyone specifically, I know I have, I just, not many times, so just interested in if anyone has.
I think our coaches, and again, this goes with the education of the coaches, a lot of our coaches will actually encourage the athletes to take a mental health day. They have, most of our coaches, and the ones that I've worked with, it's literally, they'll either text me or they'll text the coach and say, hey, I need a day. And the coach will, okay. And normally if it's a pattern, then it's more like the coach will follow up with, hey, are you getting help? Have you reached out, to counseling services, et cetera, et cetera. But there's some times where athletes, we had one this past year who had a sudden death, and it was like, I need time. And it ended up being an indefinite amount of time, but they needed time. And it's just having that relationship with the coach and having the coach understand that there's going to be days that people need to take a mental health day. And I think if the coach understands that, to where, that's the trust that you have with your coach, to where if I say to my basketball coach, hey, such and such needs to, have a solo practice, shoot some free throws, get out of here, that's kind of what they do. If they're not there mentally, and that's from our perspective that's also setting them up for injury. If an athlete's not focused at a practice because something else is weighing them down, is there greater risk of injury? They're out there just going through the motions of a practice and not focusing. They get lazy with something, lacrosse, hit somebody with a ball in the face, wild swing with baseball bat or softball.
I'll say that we have some on the positive side too. We haven't experienced anything on the negative side yet, but we actually have a couple of our teams, their coaches has they say you only have 3, but they give more, but they have you have X amount of mental health days. If you need to take a mental health day, that's fine. And then we have some of our coaches who have come to either the sport I work with or some of the other sports and said, hey, I had a conversation with so-and-so athlete. They're not going to be at practice for the day, or they're taking a few days off. They have to take care of some things in their space, and just want to give you the heads up. So on the positive side, we've experienced that, but I'm sure at some point the negative aspect will come where, no, you can't do that, right, is what a coach will say. But so far, it's been all positive.
Yeah, I haven't had negative of you can't do that, just more why, where they at. Right. Got some nosy coaches, so just making sure that I just was interested if anyone had that.
I think like some other people were saying, the big thing too is, for me, is having those conversations with your coaches at the beginning of season and kind of letting them know, this is the language that we might be using in situations like this of so-and-so, might be needing a day here or there. And then that way they're kind of tuned into what's going on beforehand. And so that way you both have a game plan from both sides of it of how you're going to handle that situation should it come up. And I think if someone's going to be stepping away from a longer period of time, usually coaches, from my experience, are tuned into that already, so they don't need to ask why, because they already might not know all the details, but we all have eyes and ears and we can pick up on things. Not here, but I have had situations at a different university where a coach was, why, what are we doing, what's the point? And I think in those situations, also explaining to them either beginning of the year or in that moment, explaining to them kind of the mental health HIPAA laws and how I can't tell you, and it's because of this and it's because of that, and I just need you to respect that for the student athlete, and just kind of reiterating that your hands are tied with what you can and can't communicate to them. But also talking to the coach too, or not to the coach, but to the athlete when they're talking to you, and trying to encourage them to speak with the coach, because sometimes that does help them in the long run. And if they don't want to, they just don't want to, and we can lead the horse to water. We can't force them to drink it, but sometimes reminding them that having a conversation with your coach could be helpful as well.
I just can't keep my mouth shut. One of the problems that we can run into, though, is that we become a tool. We become something that an athlete can use to manipulate situations, and you have to be very careful about that slippery slope and how you navigate that. Not all athletes are as upfront. I mean, they're trying to get out of things. They're trying to do things for other reasons. Especially in the mental health space and where we're at right now, it's almost been weaponized in some respects. That some athletes have said, well, if I just use this, there's nothing they can do about it. I'm not advocating that. I'm not saying that this is what we should be doing, but we also have to understand that there is that element there, and we have to be aware of it and be. Bottom line is we still have to be the advocate for the athlete. We still have to be the one who is going to fight the battle for them. So we may have to step in and take the bullet in that respect and say, well, I'm sorry, coach. Kid says this is where they're at. I have to respect that, and you do too. So, but it is a little bit of a slippery slope.
Brad, I mean, I can certainly understand that and see that from your position. Pardon me. Many of you talked about having somewhat of an integrated model where you have access to the mental health space and you can rely upon that. Some of you actually have full-time employees that are LCSWs or psychologists, et cetera. And I think that there's some safety in numbers in the terms of, not taking that responsibility completely to yourself. And if you don't have those things, then I think that's stuff that we should be talking about how to make that team that we've discussed a stronger entity. So if you have somebody that's on campus, if you have somebody that's responsible for working with the athletic department, then these are the kinds of athletes that should be immediately referred. So in other words, you all wouldn't hesitate if you were hearing signs of cardiac difficulties. You're not waiting a really long time to think about it to make a referral to the cardiologist to tell the coach that they're going to the cardiologist. You're going to talk to your team physician, et cetera, and reach out to that professional and go through those steps. So we're really good at it in terms of the physical aspects of it. It's this new deal with, and I don't like weaponized, but it's but coming from you, so if we have the ability to be able to reach out and utilize that mental health person, that is their responsibility. That is what they're skilled at and what they're expected to do. They're more comfortable in that space, and particularly if the role's already set, that this is the step there, then that insulates the decision making, and it doesn't put you at odds with them as easily. There's no easy solution, and even if you have these things in place, we know there's the politics and the other stuff that goes along with the business that we do. But to your point, we have to advocate for the athlete, and so when your level of expertise, pardon me, gets, against the wall, you look for an ally yourself. And so get that other person on board, it makes it a little easier to kind of, work through those kinds of situations.
I mean, to clarify, I'm not taking fall or whatever, but the bottom line is you're gonna do what you can to help the athlete.
Well, I think in that situation, when someone asks for a mental health day, then they need to be seeing the mental health counselor. You just don't get to take a day off, because you need to learn some coping skills so you can get through your day and do what you're supposed to do as a student, as an athlete.
I've been quiet long enough. Just a comment, and I just want y'all to think about this, and we may talk about it more at the conclusion of the stream, and maybe even into tonight. But how much do your student athletes really understand about the mental health space? I mean, they're coming in as freshmen. What kind of education in the mental health space have they had? I mean, they've never talked to anybody probably about a season-ending or career-ending, well, it wouldn't be career if they're still playing, but a season-ending injury in high school. I mean, mom and dad most of the time is probably going to talk about playing time with their coach, right? They just don't have the acumen, if you will, to understand what's available in the mental health space and what it's all about. So I think onboarding them and getting them on the same page early on, understanding the ground rules with a mental health day, that if it's a mental health day, then there needs to be a conversation, right, with a mental health professional, like Fred said. So again, I think looking at that probably is maybe something that the Mental Health Subcommittee takes on going forward, is just an onboarding checklist, if you will, of program that schools can put together specifically for their situation, because everybody's integrated a little bit differently. But to get those 17, 18-year-old or even JUCO kids that haven't had the exposure to the mental health space before, to get them up to speed and what's available and what the expectations are.
And going along with that too, I just thought of a point, like most of your kids are going to be on TikTok, right? Like I am on what is called like quote unquote mental health TikTok, and there's so much out there that is like so false. And how can we make sure that with the onboarding and with the education that we're giving our student athletes the actual knowledge and the truth of what mental health looks like, and not just the cool cliche trendy words that are happening right now? Like how can we make sure that we are being truthful about the information that we're giving them, right? So they may know, like what Mike was saying, they may know some things, but is what they know the truth, or is it just what's going on right now?
Any other questions? Okay, well, hearing none, thank you very much, Caroline, and thank you. Yeah, absolutely. And thank you to the room and to our visual guests with questions. This has worked out so far extraordinarily well from our point of view. This is exactly what we wanted to do. We wanted to have a conversation. We wanted to share ideas and get things together. And what we're going to do is take another break. We'll begin right at the top of the hour again. We'll talk about suicide and some summation things, and try to pull all these things that we're talking about together. So give yourselves the applause, and what a great job this has been so far with your participation. It really has been good. So we'll see you at 3 o'clock. So just a little bit myself, I am a licensed clinical psychologist. I live in the Fort Myers area. I'm associated with FGCU. I've been fortunate enough to be part of the medical advisory board for the ASUN, and then to chair the subcommittee on mental health, mental wellness, and that is what has brought us here. I have been extremely impressed with the evolution and the movement forward in the discussion about being a mental health professional and being associated in terms with, the conference and what the individual universities are doing. And so we've really made strides in process with mental health. These days, it's good to be in the mental health field. We talk about stigma, and when I first started years ago in education and at a master's level before becoming a psychologist, there were real stigmas, there were real problems, and so we now talk about the stigma and try to reduce the stigma. You first have to acknowledge that there is stigma before you can talk about getting rid of it. So we've come a very, very long way. In my involvement at FGCU, the idea of having team psychologists or having people associated in the mental health field working directly with athletics was a rarity. Hearing the groups here talking about how now there are more people involved and there's more direct linkages to that is fantastic. What we'll talk about in line with the discussions earlier, but also with this presentation, is about making sure how we can most successfully use them in your own situations. So you have the resources that you have. If you get more resources, obviously it'll change and it's better. But even with the most resources, you still have to utilize them right. You still have to have plans in place and protocols in order to be efficient with it. So the topic we want to talk about is suicide, and this too is an interesting topic. 15 years ago, if you were trying to do a research a project and try to get information about suicide programs, understanding suicide, and I'm going to use the terms that I am most familiar with. There are a lot of jargon in the field in terms of how people now refer to what would be suicide attempts, successful suicides, those sorts of things. So I'm not going to get bogged down into the semantics of it, but if you go to the Google search and you put in Google suicide or suicide plan or suicide prevention, there are just endless programs that are out there. We're going to talk about a few, some of them mentioned partially, some of them you're familiar with, but where this is all coming from and why we're talking about this today comes from the Medical Advisory Board, where we started this discussion. In this talk, we'll talk very little, but mentioning statistics, warnings, myths. We'll talk about the programs I just mentioned, also some questions that you might have asked a student, or students may ask their athletic trainers and others on staff, and how we might handle those questions, and then just sort of a summary about that. But where we originated this from is this is the task that we started off with as the subcommittee, was through the NCAA and the recognition that we have to now do something about this, and the universities must be compliant in some way to pick something to address the issue of suicide. And so the Medical Advisory Board subcommittee came up with these pieces and made the referral, and I'm not exactly sure where it is through the process. I think you as ATs have already seen it. I'm not sure if it's gone to the presidents, et cetera, but there will be a statement about what we are going to, from the ASUN, collectively agree upon. The one thing that we agreed upon is that each of the universities is going to make their own decisions about things. So it's not going to be that we've picked something and said this is the way to approach it. But we're going to talk about some of those things and how we might be able to help if you haven't made a decision, or bring discussion to you so you can bring it back to the universities to talk about ways of doing it. But this is the impetus for why we have started and what we're talking about. Basically, what we wanted to focus on, obviously, is mandatory training for people in the athletic department, but we also wanted people that have any contact with student athletes to be involved. So anybody that has contact with folks should be aware of these things, because it's not necessarily the coach or not necessarily the athletic trainer or their advisor who they're going to talk to about this. So we want everybody to be aware of what is going to happen. Giving you the answer to the quiz before we do the quiz, they've already talked about it in both presentations, is the idea of referral. So when we go through this process and we talk about this stuff, we are talking about a referral process. We're not talking about putting the onus on anybody individual or anybody in particular in the athletic department. One of the recommendations was QPR. How many are familiar with QPR? Okay. Anybody that's done the QPR training at any level? Okay. So some people have done that. So if you notice, the QPR is for question, persuade, and refer. Again, the word refer is going to be key in all the things that we're going to talk about. What we want to be able to do is to provide an atmosphere of acceptance and understanding. We all have training, we all have some knowledge about this at different levels and different extents, but it's really being prepared to react at the proper time. So we're asking, if you don't pick QPR as the particular one, that you do pick some evidence-based, something that's talking about reducing suicidal behaviors, something that's going to recognize warning signs, empower participants, and then describe for the individual what emergency access is, that refer piece, how do they get to where they need to get to. So this is the impetus for why we're talking about this to you all today. We have discussed it in terms of the subcommittee. We've given these words out, but now we're trying to follow up with a little bit of practical opportunity. And if there's questions and things we can do to help with the decision process, then so be it. So I'm going to talk a little bit, but very little, about statistics, warning signs, and myths. How many people feel pretty comfortable that you know what the statistics are about suicide, you know what the warning signs are, you know what the myths are? How many feel comfortable with that? Really, not as many hands as I would have expected. So I guess I'll get rid of this slide, because I felt like this would be my opportunity to be preaching to the choir, because you all know about these things. But if not, and again, I would challenge you as head athletic trainers that your staff, if I were speaking to the entire staff that you have, I wouldn't feel as comfortable that they would potentially be as well trained as some seasoned folks and some people that have had experience. And so, as you well know, with the difficulty in trying to hire athletic trainers, that you're hiring many more people with less experience than you might want to or have in the past. And so, again, this is about what you're going to take back to the university. It's not designed for you individually as head athletic trainers. So if you want to go down the list, and our folks online can see this as well, so I'm not going to go through that. But what I am going to say is there's nobody in this room that has any doubt that suicide's a serious issue. There's nobody in the room that thinks that it's not a potential problem. There's nobody in the room that thinks that they might not come in contact with a situation in a very realistic way during the course of your job. Is there anybody that disagrees with those statements? So we know it's an issue. We know we need to be paying attention to it. We know what the warning signs are, right? People that talk about wanting to die, feeling some guilt or shame, have a burden that they feel they are to others. There's different feelings, the feelings of hopelessness, sadness, etc., a kind of emotional pain that they're going through. So we're familiar with that. Anybody not familiar with that kind of stuff? We're still pretty good, right? When we see things that are signs of it are changes in behavior, right? So we've already heard, when you make a plan, the idea of intent, the withdrawal from friends, the behavioral kinds of things that are different, they're not themselves, et cetera. So for the most part, we're pretty good at identifying somebody that we have a good relationship with, or a person we see regularly. We're pretty good with identifying somebody that's in trouble, or somebody that might need something, or somebody we're concerned about. We all agree with that. So with that in mind, we're targeted, we're positioned for being able to do some sort of intervention. And that's what we want to talk about. So little participation-wise, truth or myth? Most people with thoughts of suicide have made up their mind that they really want to die. Truth or myth? Anybody say truth? Okay. So again, I'm expecting that most of this stuff is pretty common knowledge, but maybe it's not, and I guess that's why we're reviewing it. So the answer is definitely a myth. okay? Many of individuals that are in that mind with suicidal ideations, et cetera, that are struggling with things are not wanting to die at all. And we've all heard about the suicide attempt that looks like the cry for help. And for most of the time, that's what they're doing. So we need to be attentive, we need to be educated, we need our staff, we need the university staff to be aware of these things, because they may be getting signals, they may be getting warning signs that they're not aware of because they're not properly trained in this as we are. So definitely that this is a myth. The next one, mental health professionals are the only ones that can help a person in crisis. Myth or truth? Okay, so why is it a myth? So you guys thought you were just going to be able to answer and be done.
Most people just want somebody to talk to.
Yeah, right. Most of the time, people want to be heard. They want to have some guidance, and sometimes when they talk to us about these things, they're talking to us because they're expecting us to refer them. They're really not asking you to solve their problems, right? As a clinical therapist, I don't solve anybody's problems, right? They're expecting me to listen and then potentially give them some things, teaching coping mechanisms, teaching them the things that are there. They're looking out and reaching out to us, not for us to potentially, solve their problem, but rather to listen and get them to the right place, direct them. And particularly, for the most part, 18 to 22-year-olds that we deal with in student athletes at the collegiate level. These folks are having a real hard time, all the transitions, all the adjustments, all the stuff that we've talked about that they're facing. People who want attention talk about suicide. Those who are set on killing themselves say nothing. Myth or truth? A little quieter. What's a guess?
I feel like that's a little mixed.
Feel it's a wishy-washy one on the third one to get you to talk more. Not intentionally, but I'll take that. So the answer is that there is a little bit of a mix in the stuff that we talk about, bell-shaped curve, not everybody falls into the same thing. But don't be confused by the idea that somebody's talking or saying things and they're seeking attention and they're not paying attention to it. So they very well may be seeking attention, but they're, again, wanting someone to talk to. They're wanting to get that referral. They're wanting to get to the right place. They don't know, and they're not sophisticated enough. Many times we give them too much credit or we expect too much out of them. And so when they do things like that, we look at it and dismiss it as, childish behavior or immaturity or things. And so in this particular situation, we need to be listening, thinking about that, and then talking about what we're going to do and where you're going to refer them. There's no correlation between drug and alcohol abuse and suicide. Truth or myth? Myth? Who think it's the truth? It's the truth. So, folks that are dealing and coping in inappropriate ways, getting into drugs, getting into alcohol, etc., will tend to do that more when they're getting closer and closer to issues of suicide. Many successful completed suicides, individuals are under some sort of influence because it's an extremely difficult and challenging thing to be able to come to that decision and actually go through it. And so there is usually some inappropriate coping mechanisms, inappropriate behavior that's associated with it. So when you see and hear people talking about, increased uses of alcohol, increased uses of drugs, even if it's, medically prescribed marijuana, if that's okay where your state is. Those things are still warning signs that we need to pay attention to. Somebody needs to be asking about that. Experts believe for each teen suicide, there are at least 2 attempts. So, in other words, we see if someone's completed a suicide that there's 2 other kids out there that have tried. You think that's a truth or a myth? Okay, I'll wait. Come on, guys. It's a myth. The number is actually over 20. So the issue is that for everything that we see, there's 20 more kids that are out there and doing it. And I know this says teens, but at least half of our population are typically still teens. So young adult statistics are not that far off. So the point is that we heard of the tragedy of the student athletes in 22, where we had a record number of individuals. Okay, and the thoughts that was bad enough was that we in the field think about how many more were how close they were. And so we do need to be paying attention. We do need to be looking at these. Top factors associated with suicide are depression and feelings of helplessness and hopelessness. And helplessness and hopelessness are the first parts of the diagnostic criteria that Caroline talked about for depression. So is there a correlation, is there a link between depression and suicide? So you guys are getting a little hesitant. You were really confident in the beginning. You know this stuff, it's true. That people and individuals that are going down that path really have that feeling of helplessness and hopelessness. I do want to differentiate something in terms of what's called a suicidal ideation. We've all heard that. We've used those terms. We've read those things, and people having the ideations about committing suicide. There's another thing that commonly gets confused with that, and that's something that's called death ideation. So there's a lot of individuals that have thoughts about their death. Properly or improperly, meaning positively or negatively. But somebody that says, I am so down and depressed and I just wish I could go to sleep, and if I don't wake up, it's okay. Okay, there's something going on there, but that's not an alarm to say that that's suicide. In terms of what's our key word for this? Refer. Right? Keyword for refer. So if you're hearing something like that, that's still something to refer. They're obviously dealing with something that they want to escape, and they don't have the means or the skills at the moment to do that. So we definitely want to get them out and want to refer them, but that's not an indication. Death ideation is not an indication of suicide. Females are more likely to attempt suicide than males, but males are more likely to die by suicide. This half says true. Brad says no.
True. Males are much more likely to commit suicide.
Right, so males die more by suicide.
Well, they die more by suicide, but they're more likely to attempt it.
They're not.
Really?
Females are 4 to 5 times in the general adult population to do the cry for help, do something, etc., and reach out and try to avoid the consequences. Males are way more successful at being at committing suicide. But we definitely outperform the women on this task, and you can see where it gets us. So, not the kind of competition we want to win. So where you look at this, that this is an important statistic to understand in terms of when you're interacting, when you're referring, what's going on. So subtle comments and things that are there by females, you still want them referred, but it may not be as crucial and again, that's not our job to decide, but that's the point. It may not be as crucial. When males are suicidal, they tend to be more successful. So in terms of completing suicide, part of the reason is that men are successful because when they get to that point, they choose a method that is more lethal. And so typically men will die more by things like self-inflicted gun wounds, whether it's handguns or shotguns. And so whether you didn't really mean it, or whether you just were in a bad way, or you were, intoxicated at the time, if you shoot yourself for the most part in certain places, it's going to work, and that might have been a regret, but there's no going back. Females tend to, even when they're successful at committing suicide, commit suicide in ways that have longer time to succession to be completed. When they will take pills take a longer time. If they take too many pills, they may, vomit the pills, and the pills aren't in their system long enough. When people do self-inflicted cutting, you think of the individuals, folks with eating disorders, histories of abuse, that more females than males will do cutting behavior. The cutting behavior that they do is not in a way that's conducive for it to be successful because of how they cut, which direction do they do the cutting. So women are far more likely to be in this realm, but way less likely to be successful. So the deal with suicide is It is a obviously high intensity, okay, but low frequency. We don't have to deal with this very often, okay? In my entire, career in the state of Florida, the involuntary admission to a psych hospital is called the Baker Act. I have probably in my career signed 5 Baker Act forms. That's somebody that, was seriously in need of being taken to a place so they could be secured, safe, and out of harm's way. It doesn't happen a lot. And the problem is that, though, it only takes once to, that's the deal. It ruins your career, ruins their families' lives, it takes their life. So we want to make sure, we don't want to get morbid and we don't want to overemphasize it, but it's a serious problem. It's around all of you. It is definitely in your training room, okay? So if you think that it's not, then it's somebody else's, then that's a miscalculation of judgment. It's definitely in your training room. It's to what level, what extent, and what we do about it. People who think about committing suicide tend to hide it very well. Think it's a myth? Think it's true. Okay. So, we could go both ways, but generally the statistics are that people that commit suicide usually are leaving some sort of breadcrumbs for somebody. Okay, they may not be very effective at it. We may not be very attuned into what that is, but generally speaking, individuals really don't want to kill themselves. It really is a last resort. There are exceptions to that. But again, they're leaving some notice. They're putting the things out there. We need to be acutely aware of these things and catch up. We say we know this is the warning signs and we know the statistics and all, but we also have to be aware of it. People who talk about killing themselves or making suicide threats and attempt should always be treated and taken seriously. Okay, so what's the response to that? So it's true, right? We all agree that it's true, but what does that mean that you're going to do? Right, so we're talking about this. So somebody has makes a statement about killing themselves. They have a plan. They intend to do it, and they have the means, methods, and motives right in their car. Okay, yeah, so we're in Florida, so we would get. But who's going to Baker Act them?
I'll have to call UPD and then come.
Right. So here's what we're going to get to when we go to the programs and move forward. It's that emergency response plan, that emergency action plan, is that I'm going to want to know when we're done talking about this, all of you being able to tell me what that is. Okay, so it's one thing to worry about it when they're not getting along with their coach and they want a mental health day, and we think about that, and that's one kind of problem we can work our way through. Okay, this is a serious problem. So what is it, and what are the steps that are there? And then the other question is for the head ATs is, do your staff know that? And if the staff make their phone call to you, that's the part of the emergency response plan, then that's fine, if that's what it is. But we're going to want to figure out, do we really feel comfortable with that? And I'm hoping the answer to that at the end is yes, we're comfortable, we know exactly what to do. But if not, we obviously have work to do. Most people think about suicide are in a long-term crisis situation. Myth or truth? Long-term crisis.
Not always long-term, but it can be.
Certainly can be, but is it long-term typically? Okay, so it's not. What do you think it is?
It's traumatic experience or something like that.
Okay.
Loss of a loved one.
Okay.
Loss of a job.
Okay. Loss of something, right? The statistics say that it's typically some traumatic event that occurs within the last few weeks. And with statistics, you can, read statistics, and then different studies will say different things. But the point is that we often, jump to the conclusion that this is somebody with a long-term problem, or they've always been that way, or something that's going on. And somehow by it being a long-term problem, it generally tends to, in the human experience, lessen our acuity to it, less than our paying attention to it. It's been that way. She's always been that way. He's done this before. He's been, it's, oh, okay, well then, it'll pass. And so if we respond to it that way, then we're not necessarily taking it. We agreed that we should take it all seriously, but then we may not be taking it serious. So we want to look at this stuff that if you hear about it, it's not the kind of thing, well, we're going on spring break and, when we get back, I'll bring it up, because that's not the best approach. We want to attack it. We want to be on top of it. Okay. So suicide prevention programs. I mentioned to you that if you go Google right now and put in suicide prevention programs, it's just endless programs. There are federal programs. There are each states have programs in their mental health space. If you do that, you'll pop up and see universities that have put together their whole protocols and things like that. There is not a shortage of information that's out there. So what's good about that is it certainly gives everybody a variety. It's certainly a topic that you can discuss, and you can see some commonalities and things that work. So what we're doing, again, going back to our focus, is that as the Medical Advisory Board, as the subcommittee, as the NCAA has asked us, we need to come up with a program, and we need to figure out which one makes sense and works best for us. Okay, some people have already begun some of those things. We suggest multiple. It's not one thing that you have to go to, but we want to be able to do that. So we're going to very briefly kind of screen through these. Most of these, I think you will know. Some we talked about already. So the QPR program. So again, my common word for this at the end. What do I want you to think about? What word? Refer. Okay, and so this program's a gatekeeper program. The purpose of the program is that we want someone in position to recognize the crisis or the warning signs and then be able to get them to where they need to go. So whether your university decides to do this method or another method, but what we want you to be able to do is to be able to question people, be able to persuade them to follow the referral and the recommendation for you to take it to the next step. Another one, Living Works, does Safe Talk. There's different types of programs. There's different lengths of programs, but it's the same thing. Awareness, identification, engagement, understanding, creating safety, and planning. So there are numbers of these programs that are out there. The ones that I've put up here are ones that other universities and are pretty common in terms of general discussions about the issues of suicide. So if you already know and you're already done with this, then that's great. So be it. If you're happy with what you got, that's even better. If not, there's other choices and things to look at. So we want to give you some options. If you're looking for, to just compare your program to something else, then these are good options. We already talked about youth mental health first aid, and I forgot Algie in the hotel room. Algie did make the trip in the suitcase, but I forgot to bring. When you, has anybody done youth health, the first aid? You said somebody, right? Did you guys all get your Algie? No? They don't do that anymore? Wow. This program has changed tremendously. Just before COVID, when I was going to train, I was scheduled to go to Austin, Texas, which would be a great trip and was a 3-day experience, et cetera. COVID hit, they canceled that, and then they modified the training, and I was one of the first classes that learned online. They keep changing and keep modifying and refining the program. I believe now the downside to this is that they're now making all of the training experiences. So I was going to the train the trainer so I could become a trainer to train a class. We were doing that all through Zoom. It worked out really well. I think they have gone back. It's just a 1-day training now, but that's an 8-hour block. And I believe that it's now all face-to-face. And so I personally think that that's just more restrictive. It's much more difficult to do. But the program, again, it's another opportunity for you to learn or hear about something that's different. Having more of these programs under your belt versus less is a positive. As Anna had talked about in terms of Algie, what are we looking to do? We're looking for ultimately to do what? It's not solve the problem. It's encouraging them to do things for self-help, but also for them to accept professional kind of help. So another idea of referral. You all are well familiar with this. There are online courses that are involved that you can take in the mental health space in particular. It is virtual, so you can get e-learning. There's a mental health course that has 4 sections. Within that, they talk about different steps and how you would approach issues of suicide. So again, just another option or something for you to think about. Additional resources, I mentioned that there's on the federal level, on the state levels, et cetera. So is there anybody not familiar with 988? Everybody knows what 988 is? Yes, okay. So that's a big option. That's relatively new in terms of being able to reach out and make sure that the students are available, have that available, and they can reach out, students, staff, coworkers, friends, family, everybody. SAMHSA are people for who is not familiar with what SAMHSA is, the blue one in the middle. Everybody knows SAMHSA? Substance Abuse, Mental Health Services Administration from the federal government. If you go to that website, samhsa.gov, and you look up resources, you can find all sorts of resources for mental health. Some of them are very dated. They go back to some of them I think are still in the 90s. Certainly there's some 2000, 2001 kind of things that are out there. They're evidence-based things. They're acceptable programs. They have a whole section on mental health and working with different age groups. There's none specific for student athletes, but there are for the age groups, for college folks. So that is a terrific resource for you all as well as any of the other students in terms of gathering information. Suicide Prevention Resource Center, everybody's familiar with that. But again, when you think about this and want to share information, people want to have choices. People want to be able to make decisions, and so this is a good way for them to be able to do that. All right, so we're going to go to the next section, and I'm still preaching to the choir, but not intentionally. But I do want to recognize that you have some, awareness about this, though. So I do want you to think about some of this, and this is the part where I hope will stimulate a little bit of discussion before we wrap up. These are some questions that will come up. They're questions that maybe your staff have come to you about what do I do or how do I do it. There may have been situations that you were in, and how do you get a response. So I'd like to hear what people, if you've experienced this, and if not, we can talk a little bit about it. So one of the questions, how do I start the conversation with an individual? So have you been in a situation where you felt like you wanted to talk to a student athlete about, say, anything in the mental health space, particularly concerns about changes in their behavior and suicide, and didn't know what to do or what to say? Or have you felt so uncomfortable about it that you're not going to do it again? Or are you comfortable about it? And I know this is really easy for me, and here's what I want to share with the group. So if you haven't had it, or if you have had it, but somebody tell me what you've done or what your concerns have been. Come on. There you go. Come on.
And starting the conversation, it's literally trying to find a common ground. That's kind of what I go to, or whether they're in the training room just to get a bag of ice, or they're on the Normatec or something like that. If I've noticed a change in behavior, I'll kind of be like, hey, is there something going on outside of here? How are your parents doing? How's relationship, et cetera, and just kind of opening the conversation. And if they accept it, great. If not, I've at least started it to where hopefully the next day they'll come back in and say something.
Okay.
Pretty similar. I think for me, it's not a conversation I'm ever comfortable with, but I also know it is within my responsibility to have that conversation. Or maybe I know they're more comfortable talking to a teammate and maybe asking the teammate, what are your observations with this? And if our observations are aligning, kind of helping them with it, something like that. But I don't have a problem having the conversation, but it's not an easy conversation to have.
And that's great. What I encourage is to be able to have a question, a discussion with people when you go back and you talk and find out whether they find it uncomfortable. Okay, I can tell you that not not as many with athletic trainers, but certainly other folks in the athletic department that, this isn't an easy thing for them to do, even when stuff has been presented to them. So again, we talk about keep your acuity up, pay attention, listen to everything that's there, look these warning signs, somebody says something sounds out of the ordinary, or you have a relationship with them, and how do you begin that conversation and what is it you can say? So this isn't on the myths, okay, but what do you think the data say regarding bringing up the topic of suicide and having that enhance the person's thinking about it? Does it make it worse? Are you planting a seed? We talk about that all the time, right? Plant a seed with somebody, give them something to think about, et cetera. So what's the likelihood that if you're bringing it up sort of out of the blue, or they're going to see it out of the blue, what's the effect that's likely to increase the chances of any kind of suicidal stuff, right? Pretty small, right? Pretty small. You can never say none, but pretty small. So the point is that sometimes that's what we use, or when we struggle with it, that's sort of the reason in our mind that, well, I don't want to start the conversation. I don't want to bring this stuff up because it might, lead them to something else. What it's more likely to lead them to is what? What are they more likely to do if you bring it up and start discussing it and are comfortable with it, right? Right. They're going to open up and talk to you about it because you brought the subject up, because you put it on the table and you're there. And, again, they can always use the excuse that, you're in a position of authority. You're, a person that's part of the university, that they're there and they're students. I mean, they can respond to you in that way. But it opens up the conversation. It does not make the conversation more difficult, or does not put the student in a different kind of place. So you can say things like, I noticed that you don't see them yourself lately. I'm worried about you. You meeting them where they are, showing an interest, telling them that you care about them. We talk about that in terms of going to therapy, that sometimes just going to therapy is because somebody outside of the university, sometimes outside of that realm, is just paying attention to them. And the fact that somebody's paying attention and making effort to them is an opportunity for them to open up. I saw your social media post, or I saw something, or I was told something. Is that a problem? You think that's a good opening? That's a great opening. Okay, particularly with this cohort of folks, right? They spend more time on their phones than they do interacting with human beings. They spend more time sending messages and things like that and exchanging ideas through their telephone. If you told them that you saw some social media post or that you heard about a social media post, they're going to be impressed that you even know that they have a social media. Okay, there's a distinction there between a potential age issue. So if you're aware of their social media stuff and you can talk quasi-intelligently about it, that's more likely going to be an opening than a door shutting for that. You seem angry, down, upset. What's going on? Being very straightforward, very direct with them is a pretty easy thing to do, and it's an appropriate thing to do. It gets you to the point where you decide whether or not you need, our keyword for today is refer. So how are you going to know if you don't, to refer if you don't gather a little bit of information? What if you think something's wrong, but they insist that they're okay? What do you do? Okay, so observe for the warning signs. Trust your instincts. Pay attention to what you're seeing. Tell them pay attention to what's out there. And the reality is that you're probably right. Okay, share information with the appropriate people. Don't make a decision by yourself just because you're the head athletic trainer, just because you're whoever and what at the organization. The bottom line is there's a bunch of us out there that know and observe this particular kid that's at that particular level. Talk, observe, pay attention, and then make a team decision. If they indicate that they're resistant to talk to a professional, I should have put professional in quotes because my intent was, what do we mean by professional, right? And so the deal is that, we've talked about this. Well, there's the counseling center, there's the, outside referrals, there's suicide hotline, it's the AT department, it's the strength and conditioning staff that work with them. I didn't put coaches in there. Okay, I didn't put coaches in there because that's where they should be, or you would think naturally that they're first going to. The deal is that they're not going there. We have some other issues like we talked about, and you need to help them get back to the coach, back to that coaching team so that we can discuss that there's some sort of an issue there. Friends, family, roommates, teammates, people that might talk to them. Okay, and these are people that you all know. These are people that you come in contact with, you know, at the university, and you know who their friends are, you know who their teammates are, you know, and they come to you as well. So we'll get to that one. Should I keep someone's plan a secret? Okay, secret's bad. Okay, so don't agree to ever keep secrets. Okay, confidentiality is a little different, right? So we get semantical about what the words are, et cetera. You know, and you want to try to, you know, keep things confidential, so to speak. We talked earlier about the legalities in terms of, you know, keeping secrets from mom and dad. Okay, if they're over the age of 18 and they're not in an unusual circumstance in the United States, then they have the right to privacy and to make all their own decisions until they've given the release of information. And what Brad was talking about, you know, when we get to other certain things, that's the referral process. So when you send them to us, we know what the rules are, we know where we are, and we know what we need to do, okay? And so we also have the ability to act in their best interest, and must act in their best interest if a situation presents itself. You don't have that. You don't have that burden, you don't have that onus. So we're not talking about a duty to warn or somebody along those lines, but we're talking about somebody that's discussing something and they say to you, I don't want you to tell anybody, okay? You know, you have to be in a situation that you know what to do with that information. And you need to talk to your staff about that, because I will tell you that when I've talked with staff, people in athletic departments and things like that, there's a myriad of belief of what kind of duty they think that they have about keeping secrets and things like that, okay? And generally speaking, it's going to be a very small number of people that have a legal obligation to do that. And so we want the information out, we want it to the right people so that we can go down that, and that's what we're going to talk about in terms of that emergency action plan. If a person reaches the point where you're thinking about keeping secrets, then they need professional help, right? They need somebody to talk to. If they can't talk to you or they can't work with you, or you've decided you're not the right person for them to discuss this with, then they need somebody else. We can call professional whatever that is, but we need to move them along in the process. So also be clear and firm about your intentions, about what your limits are with the individual. So don't confuse them. Don't lead them along the way that they think that they have some rights of confidentiality and rights of privilege of things not being shared when they don't. So be clear about that you don't want to break trust. You don't want them not to talk to you again. One of the biggest problems that I see is individuals within the athletic department, not necessarily athletic trainers, but who we got into all of the work that we do because we're helpers, because we want to help people, we want to do something. We did specialized training so that we could help in our particular area. So we're always wanting to help these folks. And so when they bring it to us, when they share it to us, and particularly when you're working in athletics, there's a lot of folks that are sometimes not that much difference in age than the individuals. Your staffs are not that much further down the line and not that much more trained than the individual they're talking to. But they want to help, and so we get caught up in that, and we don't look at that idea about what it is to refer. And getting that referred process moves this thing along and does everybody the best service. Okay, so just some summaries. So my call to action, my message in terms of what we're doing is, my suggestion to all of you is that you know your emergency plan, that you know your limits, and that you train your staff, and staff is a broad word, anybody and everybody that you can be responsible for. If they all have the same information and we all do this and we all have the same idea of what's necessary, then we have a much better success and not likely to see people slip through the cracks. So in terms of your emergency response plan, on the medical side, we do this stuff really well. If I ask you about your medical protocols, what you need to do, and all those sorts of things, that's pretty easy. You got it all laid out, okay? For the most part, in terms of the mental health space, it can be a phone call, right? Whether it's your AT calling you as the head AT, and then you go into the next step, but it doesn't have to be sophisticated. It just needs to be getting the person to the proper place, or getting someone on the other end of the phone that can help you talk your way through to the next steps. So the real question is as we go, when we go to the discussion and you go to your meetings and things like that, is that I challenge you to say that I know what my emergency action plan is. I know what we would do in these situations, and that includes the general referral stuff. Now, it doesn't have to be the extreme of suicide. Remember, very, very low frequency, thank God, but high intensity if it's there. I'm talking about all the stuff we discussed today, all the things that we challenged you with in terms of what do you do with this, when do you do that, how do you talk to them. If you don't know that answer and you don't have that plan and you can't say, well, this is exactly the way it would go, then you need to work on it. And then the second piece to that, if you have that in place, terrific. But then the next question is, talk to the folks that work with you. Talk to your staff. Talk to the people that are in your department. Do they know the same thing? Because if they don't know the same thing, then you're not where you need to be. And so know your limits, right? It's very important. We know our limits in terms of where you are in your profession. You wouldn't dare do anything outside your scope of practice. Okay? You would never do anything that could jeopardize your license in terms of your skills and abilities and your interaction in terms of as an athletic trainer, right? I wouldn't do things outside the scope of my practice either. You're not expected to solve this problem. You're expected to recognize it, you're expected to encourage them to share information, and then you're expected to do what? Refer them and get that on down the road to whatever it is in your system. So I say, train others, talk to others, take the information back that you know, share it with the individuals, see where they are in the process. But that's what I think is the most important part. This was taken from University of Texas. I like it. It's challenging you to be the champion for the mental health space, right? You're the one that's going to take care of this. They say it's be the one, BT1, and it's so raising awareness, about the issue. I think we've got the issue raised. I think we know about it. But empowering staff, faculty, students, other people that you have contact with to be as familiar with or invested in and aware of what kinds of things that we need to do. Striving to ensure policies, culture, and environment are conducive to the student mental health, and in particular on this talk about suicide. This can change from you, okay? We all know policies, we all know culture, but I'm saying that if you look at that and take seriously that can make a difference in terms of the mental health space at your facilities. So we're going to stop here, and we're going to have an opportunity for any questions that you have. We have some time for that, so it's not dinner time yet, so we're not ready to rush off to do that. So take a deep breath. I appreciate your attention. If anybody has any questions, maybe from online, we're happy to address those and go from there.
Yeah, a couple questions from Jeff at EKU again. So I think this may be for the group. So does anyone have written EAPs for emergent and non-emergent suicidal situations? If so, has there been pushback from your Office of Legal Affairs or your legal counsel?
He asks great questions. What about that? That's for the room. I mean, university by university. Do you guys have a written, EAP?
I don't have it specific to suicide, but we have a mental health policies and procedures.
Okay. So, Fred, let me ask you, are you comfortable with them, and do you think?
Review them.
I'm sorry?
I need to go back and review them.
Okay, okay. That's an honest man. I appreciate that. Yeah, I think that's the thing. I think the answer to it also is, yeah, we have those policies, and the same way. It's like, I'd have to go back and make sure what it says and make sure that we're following it all. But hopefully we have them all.
Yeah, and we have one as well, and there's been no pushback from a legal side of it.
Yeah, same as Doug. No pushback on legal. Our language isn't specific to just suicide. It's emergent and non-emergent. And I do feel comfortable. I hope my staff would say the same. When the NFL thing went down in the fall, a lot of people that weren't paying attention to EAPs started paying attention. And we lumped in our mental health EAP as part of that review, and we actually just reviewed it with our coaches not long ago. So something we'll continue to do.
That's great. Anybody else?
I think the only pushback that we've gotten, because we have emergent and then non-emergent as well, is more about what to do afterwards when you've had to enact it. So like, say emergent, say we had in the last year at least 2 specific Baker Act cases.
Okay.
And then what happens afterwards? When
So-
they're released, we don't know. We're not informed. The university's not even informed.
Agreed?
They show up to class. Specifically, the one case I'm referring to, it happened in front of several of her teammates that she was trying to be around, and it came to the point where authorities we had to refer, and authorities we called, we enacted our EAP, and basically the entire team witnessed her being taken away.
Okay.
So they were traumatized, she was traumatized, no idea. About 3 days later, she just showed up to practice and no one knew.
Okay.
And we all just, so
Okay.
that's my issue.
So for the Florida schools that are here, we have that involuntary admission to the psych hospital for a 3-day hold to be evaluated, et cetera, and then people can be released, and 100% accurate when they get released. It's a privacy issue. I can tell you, when I do work for the court, I have a hard time getting into those facilities, even with court order, to do evaluations. So it's very, very tight-lipped, and nobody's going to give you information. So it is very challenging. I don't know necessarily the other states. I don't know what Georgia, I don't know what Carolina has, but there must be something that they do. That's a terrific question, and my answer to that is that needs to be a part of the protocol. So if that's not part of the protocol, well, what do we do, and what's the issue about re-engaging with the team? And that should be an evaluative process. So, I mean, I can tell you what the answer is. What should happen is that it should be done on both sides. There's a great example. So, in this case, the team is traumatized, and there's some stuff that because they witnessed it. The team will still be traumatized just by the loss of an individual that's no longer there and all that other stuff, no different than any other kind of traumatic kind of event. So, you need to be available that way, and the recommendation would be that the team psychologist or whomever that's involved is evaluating team members. And, I know head coaches are not going to like that. And again, we're here to advocate for the student. The bottom line is we have a responsibility to each and every one of the students. And so we don't lump them together in a big group room and say, okay, everybody doing okay after that? And then we check a box and let them go back. That's not the way to do it. Okay, that looks good, and it'll probably cut muster and get a checkbox, but it's not the way to do it. Everybody needs to be evaluated. That person, there's a procedure that's been around for years called critical incident stress debriefing, and there's many others like that, but that's been around for 20, 25 years. And so there's procedures for how that's done. There's people that are individually trained to how to deal with traumas and how to interview people, et cetera, et cetera. There's a tremendous amount of therapists that are trained in trauma-based interventions. So there's a lot of easy ways that you make the connection and you ask about that, and that comes in terms of your on-campus counseling. People may be the right ones to do that. Somebody on the outside basis, but both of those individuals should be evaluated before someone would rejoin the team. And if the individual is not willing to cooperate with that, then they should not be able to be rejoined by the team. That should be a university decision about when they're welcomed back, depending on the event. So that's a great example. And again, when you go back and check these things, making sure that part about returning is important as well, or what the effect of the individual, and their treatment or their adaptive plans, whatever effects that has, how's it affecting the other student athletes is a fair question as well.
One additional question from Jeff. What do you do to encourage roommates or close teammates who live or hang around with an individual who's shown signs of possibly attempted suicide? And is there a concern of that individual and the pressure of being the 24-hour watchdog?
I really like his questions. I can tell you that that is definitely a concern. And when we make that referral, the referral's not to the teammate to be the watchdog. Okay, it's not for the teammate to, hey, you take care of your buddy out there. Okay, and we do that a lot. Make sure he's not drinking, make sure he's not breaking the rules, make sure. And oh, by the way, now we want you to follow and make sure that he doesn't do anything in terms of his mental health space. It's important that we have the idea that, and the culture, that we could talk about that if we have permission and we're able to do that, and that people are aware so they know. But it goes back to what the emergency response plan is that, what do teammates do? Is that addressed? How do teammates, what do you teach the student athletes to do about their friends? And specifically, how to go about doing that. That should be part of what the training is. And again, I certainly understand that if, I come up with all these things and these trainings and this other stuff, that you're going to get pushback from coaches, you're going to get pushback from athletic directors, et cetera. But it needs to be incorporated. It's not hard. It needs to be part of the plan that we're doing and then touching base on it. And it's quick stuff because we already have it. It's reviewing this document. It says we don't need a 3-hour lecture about how to do it. It's already in there, and we need to make sure somebody needs to be the keeper of that, though, whoever it is at your university. But somebody needs to be aware whether or not the coaches and the staff are aware of what that procedure is. But we should be talking about that and supporting that individual and giving that individual the steps they need, which is not for them to be in charge of their roommate, which happens all the time. And I've had students, we had a concern about an individual, et cetera, and then have the student's roommate do exactly what you're saying, is that they're contacting and going, I feel like, I have the weight on my shoulders. This is a lot. What do I do? And then, that there's a real tension about that. So we need to have that as part of the plan, because that's a reasonably expected kind of thing to occur. Anything else? We good, bud? All right.
I got one.
Okay, Michael?
Since Nicole won't talk,
Oh.
There you go.
So Brad's talking is always welcomed, and it's good, a conversation, et cetera. But when my FGCU colleagues, then I get nervous.
I trained you well, Bill. But no, a situation to put out there, and some of you have probably faced it. We were just sharing, we had a shared situation some years back at FGCU where the parents of a student athlete with mental health issues was contacting the roommates, trying to get, one, information, and two, make sure they're checking up on, making sure if they're taking their medication, going directly to their roommates. And that can cause a real nightmarish situation. So I don't know if anybody else has ran into that or not, but that's out there as well.
That's a tough situation. Thank you for sharing, though. I'll just leave it at that. So one of the other side to this, and Brad had mentioned something before, and then the question about, generally speaking, your legal department should be extraordinarily happy with a protocol that is reviewed and approved and executed because it reduces the liability for the university. There is an expectation in the law that we should deal with foreseeable situations. And these are all foreseeable situations because we're talking about them. So if we don't have things in place to address these things, then, we're going to be more concerned about being negligent and having a concern when that very infrequent but high-intensity event occurs. And so the issue is that I would be surprised if you didn't get overwhelming support from your legal departments about putting these things down and doing these things that are reasonable and doing things that are state-of-the-art and consistent, which is also a good reason to be sharing it among conference membership so that we have, partners that are doing the same sorts of things. So I would be extraordinarily surprised if there were legal pushback to any of that.
One of the things that I've seen, and not in my history with working in athletics, is that the concept of what a recommendation is versus what is a mandate. Well, the NCAA, as we all know, makes recommendations. But some of the biggest problems that we've seen is, well, it's just a recommendation, don't worry about it.
Correct.
Well, that's crap. Quite frankly, the bottom line is when they get to the point where they're making that recommendation, they're doing it based on what is quote unquote the gold standard or not the gold standard. And if you're not doing what is the gold standard,
then you are setting your university, yourselves, and everybody else up to. And I have heard countless stories from colleagues about, well, I took this to my AD, I took this to my administration, and they say, it's just a recommendation, we don't have to do that.
And that's the call to the champion, and that's the idea about getting it past that. And here's the other part about the referral piece. So again, in terms of, this involuntary commitment, we call, what do we do, et cetera. And, calling 911 always works, right? I mean, we're in a problem, call 911, but that's a referral too. That's passing it to some other folks that'll take it further down the line. The other thing that I strongly encourage is talk to those licensed mental health people that you either have on your staff or that you have relationships with, et cetera, and get their input, because they know what they need to do. They're just not typically privy to what you guys are doing, and they're not part of that team, so they can't give you the information. So, we want to make sure that we've included the right people at the table to have the discussion. And if we do that, then we have a far, far more likely, increased likelihood of making, the right decision, and then more importantly, getting it to the next pieces and those folks that are involved. And I would certainly, talk about discussing it to the extent that you're able and allowed and appropriate. With your legal folks about how it is, okay? Those lawyers will do the research, okay? And they will look those things up and find out whether, are you at the gold star standard, or are you at the one that I don't want to go to court and defend, okay? And when they don't want to go to court to defend it, that's when a change will occur. So again, it's going back to being the champions to get these policies and these things that are done. It's beyond sort of the scope of what you normally think. Nobody's asking you to work outside your scope. We're asking you to think about the things that are in front of you, and then when it is outside your scope, go to that expert and get that expert to help you. The mental health folks are more than happy to discuss these things, more than happy to be involved with questions about whether a patient is, a student athlete is, in a suicidal situation, because that's our help, that's what we do, that's our wheelhouse. And so the more you get those folks involved and the more that they're able to do that, then the better off that you're going to be. So we'll have time to talk more further about this. And again, I applaud the discussions. You guys have been fabulous. The attentiveness, the stuff and following it online. I can't say, I wasn't expecting it to be, honestly, this good. So I appreciate all of your stuff. I appreciate the presenters and all having the opportunity to do that. I will turn it back to Jerome so we can figure out what we're doing for our next steps. But thank you all.
Wow, what an afternoon. I'd like to thank our presenters for your time and your expertise on this very important topic. We still have a lot to learn. We still have a goal and a focus as a medical advisory board, as a ASON conference, to continue to bring education and resources to our membership to help you navigate through each and every scenario to the greatest degree possible. For the participants here, as well as our participants online, thank you for the engagement. Really appreciate this. This gives us a starting point as our first mental health or mental wellness educational session, and I'm extremely excited about where we are today. And lastly, we will post this on our ASON launch page. It will be under the tab of the membership portal, and then under delegates and communications committees materials, and then we have a tab for the medical advisory board, and we will link this presentation and discussion under that tab for our membership's use and future point of reference. At this point, we will conclude this presentation, and thank you all for your engagement. Have a great day. Stay well.